Chapter 976. Outside Mamie's, someone read out the new notice on the restaurant's door loudly, causing an uproar among the customers. They can order an extra helping of tofu pudding every week. That's so good. My goodness. Doesn't that mean the gold members can order 2 helping of tofu pudding every Monday? No. I won't listen. I won't listen. I can't stand this. I'm still a baby. How can I reach the 7th tier? Most of the customers were lamenting. After all, a 7th tier powerhouse was considered a high-level combatant even on the Norland continent. Not everyone could reach that level. Although I can't become a gold member, I still agree with Mr. Mack's system. After all, there's a high chance that someone will come to Mamie's. If something happens to the restaurant and Mr. Mack, we won't be able to enjoy the delicious food, Harrison said with a smile. I agree. Just imagining having 2 helping of sweet tofu pudding every Monday is enough to make me happy. I have to work hard and reach the 7th tier as soon as possible, a middle-aged man said with a serious expression. His eyes were burning with fighting spirit. I wonder if it will take effect immediately after I join today. I can't wait to have 2 bowls of savory tofu pudding, Branley said with a smile. Everyone was discussing the new announcement in a lively manner. Even though they were a little surprised by Mag's novel idea, most of the customers were very welcoming and supportive of it, even those who weren't as powerful as the gold members. However, some customers were also worried that if they could satisfy gold members with 2 helping of tofu pudding, it would be difficult for ordinary customers to eat tofu pudding. Yabamiya, who was taking a bite of his Rigiamo, looked at Meg and said, "Boss, will there really be 7th tier powerhouses who can become gold members?" Yeah. Those people are 7th tier powerhouses. I don't think they'll bend over backwards for a helping of tofu pudding, right? Barbara was also skeptical. From now on, I'll give you an extra beef kebab for every meal. Are you willing to help Mamie's when it's in danger? Meg asked as he looked at Barbara. I'm willing. Barbara blurted out, and a faint blush appeared on Barbara's face as she sensed the peculiar gazes directed at her. However, she still feigned calmness as she said, I didn't do it for a kebab, I just didn't want to have to clean up after the restaurant was destroyed. That's great. I was going to add you, but I didn't expect Barbara to be so noble, Meg said with a smile. But Barbara raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. She looked at the plate of beef kebabs in front of Mag and said, if you really want to give me more, then I won't turn you down. I deserve it. Let's eat. Meg smiled and placed a kebab on Barbara's plate. Will a superpower be created because of this? Shirley thought to herself thoughtfully. She had also seen the notice when she entered the restaurant. On the surface, it seemed to be Mamie Restaurant's way of protecting itself. However, if there were a lot of gold members, then they would be a group of very scary experts. If they were to make a move once, no matter what the reason was, many powers would have to think twice before making a move. Welcome. When it was time, Meg pushed the door open and looked at the customers with a smile. He said loudly, from today onwards, the amount of tofu pudding for every meal will be increased from 200 to 300 servings. The tofu pudding ordered by the gold members will not be included in the 300 servings. Long live Mr. Mack. Mr. Mack is invincible. The restaurant's entrance was silent for a while before it was filled with cheers. Mr. Mack, if anyone dares to touch Amy or Mamie's, I'll beat them to death. Crassus looked at Meg and said with a smile, I want to have 2 servings of sweet tofu pudding this morning. I'll order them now. I want 2 servings of savory tofu pudding, Julian said from the side and walked in first. Sure, Meg replied with a smile. These 2's words were like a protective talisman. Mr. Mack, although I don't eat tofu pudding, I still want to become a gold member of Mamie's. I'll sign that letter of commitment. Sargeras smiled and touched his bald head. Anna, give Mr. Sargeras a letter of commitment and a gold card. Meg turned around and said. Anna handed a piece of paper to Sargeras. He wrote his name on it seriously and handed it back to Anna. Then, he took the gold card from Anna. With Crassus and Julian taking the lead, and Sargeras setting an excellent example, many powerful figures among the customers also signed the letter of commitment and received a gold card from Anna. Meg looked at this scene with a smile. It seemed to be much smoother than he had expected. After the morning service hours, Anna put the last letter of commitment on the counter and pressed it with Ugly Duckling. She looked at Meg and said, Uncle Meg, we received a total of 10 letters of commitment and 10 gold cards this morning. Thank you, Anna. Meg patted Anna's head with a smile. There were 10 letters of commitment from powerhouses above the 7th tier, including 2 legendary great magic casters, 1 9th tier magic caster, 2 8th tier demons, 1 8th tier elf, and 4 7th tier powerhouses. Among the customers who came to the restaurant in the morning, there were 12 who were above the 7th tier. This was a very high ratio. One had to know that this was only the customers who came for breakfast. There would be more customers in the afternoon and evening. As long as they could get the promises of 50 powerhouses above the 7th tier, no one on the Norland continent would dare to cause trouble at Mamie's. No matter how the situation changed in the future, Mamie's would be able to protect herself. As for how to use that attack, that would be Meg's ultimate trump card. Those stupid elves in the Wind Forest better not mess around. Otherwise, he would let them have a taste of the wrath of foodies. Meg looked at Yabamia and said, Mia, I heard from Cece that you took in an injured girl, right? Yes. Yabamia nodded. She looked at Meg with embarrassment and said, I'm sorry, boss. I shouldn't have let others stay in the dormitory without your permission. I'm not scolding you. Saving someone is a good thing. You should be praised. Meg shook his head with a smile. He turned and went into the kitchen. Soon, he came out with an insulated lunch box. He handed it to Mia and said, There's a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, a bowl of sweet tofu pudding, and some chicken soup in here. Give it to her, but from this afternoon onwards, you have to eat your own food. I'll cook for her separately. Boss. Yabamia looked at Meg. She was so touched that tears welled up in Meg's eyes. She threw herself into Meg's arms. Meg's hand froze awkwardly. He patted Mia's shoulder gently with a smile on his face. Uncle Meg hugged Big Sister Mia with a weird smile on his face. Anna murmured in a corner. Should we tell Amy? Chapter 977. In a tea house, Robert looked at Derek, who was sitting opposite him, concernedly, and said, Mr. Derek, the progress of your food tasting review seems to have stopped for 3 days. Are you feeling unwell? Derek, who was about to take a sip from his teacup, froze. He hesitated for a while before putting the teacup down, and embarrassedly said, It's not that I'm feeling unwell. It's just that I recently came across a restaurant that was too delicious. I can't help but go to that restaurant every time it's mealtime. By the time I'm done eating, I can't eat anything else. Robert looked at Derek in shock. He was a famous food critic in the entire culinary world. How could he stop because of a restaurant? He thought for a while, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Could it be Mamie's? Yes. So President Robert knows about this restaurant too. Derek nodded. Mr. Mac's culinary skills are the best in Chaos City. He was even named the best chef by the King of the Roth Empire during the King's birthday banquet. How could I not know? Robert said with a smile. However, he looked at Derek as if he wanted to say something. Derek obviously knew what Robert wanted to say. He sincerely said, to be honest, the standard of Chaos City's food and beverage is indeed quite different from Rodu's. There are even many restaurants that don't sell vegetarian dishes. Most of them lack respect for vegetarian dishes. It's very difficult to find a restaurant that can satisfy my appetite. So, if the president has any filtered list, please give me a copy. If I have to try all the restaurants on the list, this mission is obviously impossible for me. Robert looked troubled. The Food Association had cut off all means of retreat this time and came up with a new set of rules to select truly outstanding dishes and restaurants. If they were to screen them before letting Derek make the judgment, it would be a little different from their original intention. However, Derek was right. There were many restaurants in Chaos City that were very perfunctory about vegetarian dishes. For a gourmet like Derek, it was unrealistic to keep trying these lousy vegetarian dishes. Furthermore, he didn't have enough time at the moment. After hesitating for a while, Robert looked at Derek and nodded. All right, Mr. Derek. Someone will hand over the new list of restaurants to you tomorrow morning. You just need to try the restaurants on the new list. Derek's reputation and prestige were number one among the judges this time. If he could introduce more of Chaos City's delicacies in his food review, perhaps some chefs would come to Chaos City because of his reputation. That would inject new vitality into Chaos City's food and beverage industry, which would have a good effect on the development of Chaos City's food and beverage industry. Do you know what happiness is? In the Aiden Square, a white-haired old man with a wooden staff looked at a child who was sitting on a chair and eating candy with a smile. Grandpa, I used my last copper coin to buy the bursting fireball spell from that grandpa just now. I don't have money to buy a new one. The child took out a magic book from behind his back and shook his head. Shallow. Happiness is not something that can be bought with a copper coin. The old man shook his head and looked at the little boy with disappointment. He shook his head and walked to the next child. A corner of a secret manual of the same style peeked out from the bag he was carrying. The old man, Angus, walked all over the Aiden Square for the entire morning, and finally sold a secret manual for a copper coin. Today is really a happy day. Angus lay on a recliner in the corner, and placed the copper coin in front of his eyes to look at it under the sunlight. A bright smile appeared on his wrinkled face, and half of his teeth were rotten when he opened his mouth. Old man, are you that happy to earn a copper coin? A young man asked with a smile. He was standing beside the recliner. Angus put away the copper coin when he heard that, and sat up with the help of the recliner. He looked at the well-dressed young man with a smile, and said, if you buy another one, I should feel even happier. I want two. Meg took out 2 copper coins from his pocket and handed them to Angus with a smile. He was out for a walk to bask in the sun out of boredom, and then he saw this old man who was selling fake magic books to the children. Although this kind of behavior was somewhat fraudulent, 1 copper coin was still a profit even if he could buy a comic book, so Meg did not have much objection to it. Looking at this old man who was wearing a shabby cotton-padded jacket and had a slightly stooped figure, he felt pity for him. If he had the means, why would an old man of this age have to keep bending over in the cold wind for a copper coin? Angus took the copper coin and took out a magic book called Inferno of the Heavens from his satchel. He passed it to Mag with a smile, and said, 1 person can only buy one. More than one can't do it. It's easy to go astray. 1 will do. Meg looked at the palm-sized thin booklet in his hand. It was indeed similar to the comic books he had when he was young. He did not force it, and put away the other copper coin, and prepared to leave. Young man, what do you think happiness is? Angus looked at Meg and asked with a smile. Happiness? Meg stopped in his tracks and thought seriously for a while. He smiled, and said, I used to feel that I had an endless amount of money to spend, and that I was quite happy. Now my goals are higher, and I can only feel happiness when I'm with my daughter. Angus looked at the smile on Meg's face, and his eyes dimmed. He nodded and said, "Yes, being with a child is indeed the happiest." "Old man, it's cold, go home early," Meg said with a smile. With a flick of his finger, a gold coin quietly fell into the open pocket, and he turned to leave. "Home is too far away, I can't go back." "Young man, are you willing to listen to my story?" Angus shook his head and looked at Meg's back. Meg turned to look at Angus. "If my son hadn't gone missing, he would be about the same age as you now." Angus looked at Meg and sighed. His eyes were full of regret. Meg looked at Angus. This old man seemed to have lost everything at this moment. He felt his heart clench. After a moment of silence, he said, he could be living a good life somewhere now, with a cute child and a good family. Angus's eyes lit up again, and he choked as he said, "Thank you." Meg sat down beside Angus, and asked him softly, "Old man, where are you from?" "I'm from the Roth Empire, and I'm from Rodu. I used to have a few houses and shops. 25 years ago, my 3-year-old son went missing while he was playing at the door. After my wife and child went missing, she cried every day, and passed away the next year. I've been traveling from the south to the north, and all over the Roth Empire, but I haven't found any trace of my son." Chapter 978. Angus's story was very long. His narration was a little intermittent, and his thoughts were not very coherent. However, Meg, who was sitting at the side, listened attentively the entire time. His brows were slightly furrowed, and there was pity and anger in his eyes. Human traffickers had shattered an originally perfect and happy family. A rich man who had a son in his old age had become a homeless man who measured the Norland continent with his feet. Meg did not have much feelings about human traffickers in the past, but it was different now. If someone were to kidnap Amy and he could never see her again, he would probably embark on a journey to find her just like Angus. Even if he had to turn the entire Norland continent upside down, he had to find her. Meg looked at Angus with admiration in his eyes. "I've been searching in Chaos City for more than a month. Although I didn't find any news, this is a good place. It's really a good place." Angus looked at the children playing in the square, and a smile appeared on his sorrowful face. "Look, those children are so cute. They're having so much fun. Even in Rodu, it's rare to see so many children gathering together to play. Yes, Chaos City is indeed a good place." Meg nodded with a smile too. Then, he looked at Angus and said, "Then, what are your plans after this? Are you going to continue searching in Chaos City? Or are you going to other places? Chaos City is too big. I'm old, and my brain is useless. This old man doesn't know where to start searching. I've been searching for a month, and I don't even know which places I've searched and which I haven't." Angus shook his head, and helplessly said, "I've decided to go back to the Roth Empire to search. I'll set off in a while before it snows. I'll go to the last place to take a look. When the snow falls, I'll probably have to leave too." Meg was silent as he looked at Angus. He had a million words of consolation in his heart, but he couldn't say a single one. How could he have the right to ask others to let it go without experiencing that kind of pain? "Thank you, young man, for taking the time to listen to this old man's useless nonsense," Angus said to Meg gratefully. "I should be the one thanking you for teaching me how to be a father." Meg shook his head. "As a father, don't learn from me." August hurriedly shook his head. Meg stood up and smiled at Angus, saying, "I've heard your story, so you'll have to eat my cooking before you leave. Elder, let's go and have a seat at my place. I'll send you off." "How can this be? How can a person like me go to your house?" No. August pointed at his shabby cotton-padded jacket and shook his head. Even if he's the king of the Roth Empire, I can't be bothered to invite him to my house as a guest. What has this got to do with your attire? Meg smiled and picked up the stick for Angus. Let's go. It's just ahead. Eat your fill before continuing. It's getting colder as we head north. Angus looked at Meg's bright eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "Then I'll accept your invitation. I'll be thick-skinned and have a meal with you." Face is only useful when it can be exchanged for food, Meg said with a smile. Angus chuckled as well. Meg brought Angus to Amy slowly. When Meg opened the restaurant's door, Angus stopped in his tracks. "Elder, come in," Meg said to Angus as he turned to look at him. No, no. How can I enter such a high-class and clean restaurant? How am I going to receive customers if I dirty it? Angus shook his head repeatedly. He looked at Meg and said, "Thank you, young man. I've already felt your kind intentions, but I have to go now. This is my restaurant. Before it opens today, you're the only customer. Speaking of which, I was once a citizen of the Roth Empire, too," Meg said with a smile. Angus looked at the sincere smile on Meg's face, and then at the restaurant that was so clean that it seemed to be glowing. He hesitated for a long time before nodding. He walked into the restaurant slowly, but stopped after taking a few steps. He looked left and right, and didn't continue walking in. Instead, he sat down at the seat closest to the door. He only took a small seat, and appeared to be rather reserved. "Drink some water first. I'll cook for you." Meg poured a glass of water and placed it in front of Angus before turning to walk to the kitchen. "Boss, who is he?" Phyllis looked at Angus strangely. It wasn't opening hours yet. Why did Meg specially cook for a customer? Moreover, judging from his clothes, he didn't look like a customer who could afford the meal. An old man with a story. I want to give him a meal. Meg recalled the results of the omniscient doors scan when Angus walked in just now. Those terminal and incurable diseases made him clearly realize that Angus wasn't spouting nonsense. He really couldn't survive this winter. He wandered for 25 years and went bankrupt, but he didn't complain at all. He had been living in regret and self-blame. If he couldn't see his son whom he had been separated from for more than 20 years until his death, it would undoubtedly be a huge regret for Angus. Meg also felt a deep sense of helplessness in this matter. After all, this was a child who had been lost in Roduk 25 years ago. After so many years, it was unknown what he had become, or even if he was still alive in this world. Wait. What does he look like? Meg's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said in his heart, "System, can you draw a portrait of that child based on the physical characteristics that Angus described when he was young?" This system usually won't do such things that don't concern itself with proper duties, the system said leisurely. "One portrait, 10,000 copper coins," Meg said calmly. "Esteemed host, the system is happy to be of service to you. This system has done systematic and comprehensive research on portraiture, and also has an extremely deep understanding of human evolution and development. If there is accurate physical characteristics information, and the father's DNA is collected, the portrait drawn by this system will be far more accurate than any criminal portraitist." The system's humble and confident voice sounded. "Very good. If the person is found, you will receive a reward of 1 copper coin." Meg nodded slightly. He had a new train of thought now. "This is too blissful." A line of words floated past silently. Meg pursed his lips. The system's blissful life was so simple. What a useless system. However, Meg was still at ease with the portrait produced by the system. He had once browsed news about portraitists helping to reunite long-lost relatives. This portrait was at least much simpler and more effective than Angus's description of a 5-year-old child and finding a 30-year-old young man. After all, 25 years had passed. Even if that child stood in front of Angus again, it would be difficult for him to recognize him. Moreover, Meg had Mamie's platform. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 979. How can there be such a beautiful and exquisite restaurant in this world? Even in Rodu, I have never seen such a beautiful restaurant. Angus sized up the restaurant with amazement in his eyes. His family was quite well off back then, and he had tried all the famous restaurants in Rodu. But in terms of exquisiteness and beauty, there was really no one that could compare to this Mamie's. Of course, in his eyes, gold and diamonds were not considered beautiful. They were just more dazzling. But Mamie's 2 huge crystals had completely surpassed the countless gold and gems, and were extremely stunning. The meals in such a restaurant must be very expensive, right? But Angus touched the only copper coin in his pocket and sighed silently in his heart. He felt as if he was sitting on a carpet of needles, and was a little restless. He could only hold the cup of water and drink it one mouthful after another. 10 minutes later, Meg walked out with a plate of red braised pork and a bowl of rice. He placed it in front of Angus, and said with a smile, "This is red braised pork, the new dish that the restaurant is going to launch today. No customer has tried it yet. Old man, can you help me try the taste? It smells so good." Angus's eyes had already lit up. The rich aroma of the meat wafted to his nose, and it was better than any meat that he had eaten in the past. Looking at the red braised pork in the black terracotta bowl again, it was a mixture of fat and lean meat, and the color was bright red. Even the meat skin had a crystal clear and chewy feeling, making one want to swallow their saliva. Meat. I can smell it just from this aroma. It's definitely a rare delicacy in the world. It's just that my teeth are not good, and I haven't been able to chew meat for many years. I can only thank you for your kindness, boss. Angus sighed softly with a look of pity. It was really a pity that he could only look at such delicacies but not eat them. Meg smiled and said, "Don't rush to a conclusion. This is a dish that is also very friendly to old people. If you don't try it, how will you know if it's suitable? Can I chew it?" Angus was surprised when he heard that. He looked at the smiling Meg, and hesitated for a while before picking up a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks. The cube-shaped pork had distinct skin, fat, and lean meat. It was a piece of meat that would normally make people feel greasy, but now it looked like it made people want to give it a try. Angus put the braised pork to his mouth and took a bite of the pig skin, which was usually the hardest to chew. Yes. The pigskin, which was usually extremely tough, was easily cut open by his broken teeth. It was as if he did not feel the slightest bit of obstruction. The fatty meat under the pigskin melted in his mouth. As he chewed carefully, the strength of his bite was barely discernible, and there was no pressure at all. The sweet and soft red braised meat was fat but not greasy. With a gentle bite, the sweet gravy overflowed from the meat. The delicious taste of the red braised meat was perfectly released at this moment. The taste of meat that he hadn't tasted for a long time made Angus's taste buds cheer. He couldn't help but indulge in the delicacy that he had never tasted before. The delicious red braised pork, together with the soft rice, drove away all the coldness of the winter, immersing people in the warmth of the delicious taste. He thought of some people, his wife who had supported him in times of need, and his son who surrounded him at his knees. Those few years were the happiest time of his life. If that incident hadn't happened, their family of 3 would be able to live a very happy life in Rhoda now. A drop of tear rolled down Angus's old face slowly and landed on the ground. Angus put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked at the empty bowl in front of him. He looked at Meg and said, "Boss, thank you. This is the most delicious food I've ever eaten." "Let me get you another bowl of rice," Meg said with a smile as he picked up the bowl and walked towards the kitchen. Soon, he came out with another bowl of rice. It seemed like this red braised meat had a very good adaptability. Even an old man with bad teeth could have another bowl. It could be considered as a successful research. Angus finished the second bowl of rice and the entire bowl of red braised meat. There wasn't even a drop of gravy left. "I have wine and meat. Let's have a drink." Meg walked out with a plate of beef kebabs and 2 large mugs of beer. He placed one mug in front of Angus and the other in front of himself. "I've made you spend money again." Angus's face was full of guilt. But when he saw the white bubbles of beer in the mugs and the fragrance of the wine in the air, he couldn't help but gulp again. He used to be a person who couldn't sleep without a drink before bed. But later on, in order to go further, he really couldn't afford to drink alcohol, so he gradually quit. It should have been more than half a year since he drank half a drop of alcohol. The last time he drank was when he picked up a broken wine jar and drank a few mouthfuls of wine mixed with rainwater. Meg raised the mug and gestured. Angus carefully held the mug with both hands and gestured to Meg. Then, he leaned to the edge of the mug and took a small sip. The cold and refreshing beer was even sweeter than the clear spring water in the mountains. It had a faint barley aroma and a special fragrance. It was similar to barley wine, but compared to the slightly bitter barley wine, this refreshing and delicious beer made him want to drink more. "Good wine." Angus praised and tried to take another big sip. The grease from the red braised pork previously had completely disappeared. Although it was a little cold in the winter, for an old drunkard, it was more refreshing. Angus finished the mug of beer in a short while and burped. Meg refilled his mug and said, "Old man, I'm actually a portrait artist. If you believe me, maybe you can tell me how your child looks like. I'll draw you a possible appearance of him now. You can take the picture and find someone. The success rate may be higher." "Really?" Angus looked at Meg in surprise. "Yes." Meg nodded. "My child." Angus began to sink into deep thought. Then, he began to describe the physical characteristics of the child who went missing 25 years ago. According to the system's instructions, Meg guided Angus's memories and tried his best to restore his real appearance, and not the image that was living in Angus's imagination. There is a black mole on the left side of the forehead and a crescent-shaped scar on the back of the head. His real name is Beck Barzil. Meg began to confirm the key information. Ding. Information recording complete. Ding. Gene sampling complete. Entering the analysis and drawing stage. According to the probability of genetic mutation, the system will draw 3 possible appearances and provide views from 3 directions. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "Well done. I'll reward you with a copper coin," Meg said with satisfaction. "It's the system's honor to serve you. The system will wholeheartedly provide you with better service." The system's excited and flattering voice sounded. Chapter 980. Give me a moment. I'll go upstairs to draw the portrait for you. After you get the portrait, you can go to the city lord's castle to ask. They might be able to give you some help. After that, I'll help you put up some missing persons notices. After all, Chaos City has a population of over 1 million. Maybe you can stay for a few more days and give it a try, Meg said as he finished the beer in his cup in one gulp. "Thank you so much." "I don't know how to thank you." Angus bowed deeply to Meg with reddened eyes. "It's nothing." Meg shook his head with a smile. He turned and walked upstairs, and took out the 3 stacks of pictures that the system had sent to the wrong place from the wardrobe. The pictures were very similar to the color photos, but they were actually oil paintings in order to make it look more realistic. The man in the 3 pictures looked similar, but there were some differences in the shape of his face and facial features. The mole between his left eyebrow and the crescent scar at the back of his head made him look rather handsome. He didn't have the face of an ordinary passerby. Apart from the front of his face, the system had also drawn the side of his face in the same picture. He shouldn't have been to Amy's before. I don't have any impression of him. Meg stared at the 3 pictures for a while and shook his head. Then, he said in his heart, "System, in these 3 pictures, which one has the highest probability of him looking like now?" According to the system's comparison of 100 million human genetic samples, the probability of him looking like the middle picture is 95%. The other 2 pictures are only supplementary, the system replied. Then I'll choose this one. Meg threw the other 2 stacks of pictures into the trash can at the side. He put one of them in the pocket of his apron, and then went downstairs with the other one. Angus had already finished his 2nd cup of beer, and hadn't eaten the kebab on his plate. He was looking anxiously in the direction of the staircase. Did this grandpa lose his child? How pitiful. In the kitchen, Anna looked at Angus with pity. Yes. Phyllis also nodded. Then, she curiously asked, "Boss, you only heard him talk about how the child looked like when he was 5 or 6 years old. Can you really draw him out now?" When Meg came downstairs, Angus stood up at once. "This might be what he looks like now." Meg handed the photo to Angus. Angus's hands trembled as he took the photo. Tears began to flow down his face as soon as he took a look at it. The young man in the photo was 70 to 80% similar to him when he was young. His eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same as the child in his memory. With just a glance, he could confirm that this was his child. Thank you. This is my child. This is really my child." Angus bowed deeply to Meg. His emotions were beyond words. Uncle Meg actually managed to draw the child's grown-up appearance. Whoa. Amazing. Anna looked at Mag with admiration in her eyes. Yes, and his speed is so fast. He finished it in a short while. Phyllis was also amazed. Meg reached out to help Angus up. He smiled and said, "You're welcome. Take this photo to the city lord's mansion and ask for help. They should be able to arrange a place for you to stay and some food for a short period of time. However, I can't be sure if they will search for you wantonly. At the same time, I will put up a missing person notice at the entrance of the restaurant. If there is any news, I will inform you immediately." Thank you. Angus looked at Meg and repeated these words. "I hope that every child who is forced to leave home can find their own home." Meg smiled and shook his head. It took Angus a while to calm down. He carefully put away the photo. When he turned around, he saw the long line outside the restaurant. He hurriedly said, "The customers are coming to eat. I can't affect the boss's business. I'll leave now." "Don't worry. It's not business hours yet." Meg comforted him. "I've eaten such delicious food made by the boss, but I can't pay for the meal. I'm so sorry." Angus looked at the empty bowl on the table with a guilty expression. "No, you can." Meg shook his head and smiled. "This meal is 1 copper coin in total." Angus was slightly taken aback. Then, a smile appeared on his face. He reached into his pocket and took out 2 copper coins. He put them in Meg's hand. 1 copper coin is for the meal. The other copper coin is for the food. Thank you. This is the best compliment I've heard today." Meg put away the 2 copper coins and smiled. Although 1 copper coin was not much, no customer would use half of their wealth as a tip. "I'm Angus." How should I address you? Meg opened the door and sent Angus out. Angus walked to the door and asked Meg. You can call me Mr. Mac like the others, Meg said with a smile. Thank you, Mr. Mac. Angus bowed again and turned to leave slowly. The restaurant hasn't even started business yet, but a customer has already finished his meal. Mr. Mac personally sent him out. Could it be some big shot? The customers lining up outside the restaurant were discussing curiously. Such a situation was rare. We'll be releasing a new dish at noon today, red braised pork. Meg did not explain further. Instead, he looked at the customers and smiled. Wow! Mr. Mac, you're too outstanding. You're releasing a new dish. Although I don't know how red braised pork is cooked, I think it'll be delicious. The customers were suddenly in an uproar. They were indescribably excited. Meg turned to go in with a smile. After that, he went upstairs to write a missing person notice and pasted that photo on it. After that, he went downstairs and pasted the missing person notice on the door. Although there was still half an hour before the opening of the restaurant, there were already more than 100 customers lining up at the entrance of Mamie restaurant. Everyone was looking at Mag curiously as to what he was doing. Dear customers, I have a favor to ask of everyone. This is a missing person notice. An old man from Rodu wandered around the Norland continent for 25 years in order to find his child who was stolen by human traffickers 25 years ago. After that, he came to Chaos City. This might be what the child looks like now, and some basic information about him. If anyone can provide any key information or find him directly, this restaurant will provide luxurious 2-set meal. All the delicacies on Amy's menu are free of charge and limited to 2 people at a time, Meg said loudly to the customers. There was a moment of silence outside Amy's before an uproar broke out. Oh my God! Did I hear wrongly? All the delicacies are free of charge. This is a super reward. Does it include tofu pudding? If it includes tofu pudding, I'm willing to marry whoever finds it and bring me along, a delicate-looking woman screamed. All right, I've found a way to get rid of my singlehood. Chapter 981. Meg's new notice created quite a commotion among the customers as the reward was simply too tempting. Mamie's provided an unlimited supply of delicacies, including tofu pudding. Almost all of the customers would stop to take a look as they entered the restaurant, trying to remember that very human-like portrait. Even though they didn't know him, what if they met him on the road? Some people even took out little notebooks to record the key information, and were prepared to go and search for him. Yabamiya and the rest also found out about what Mag had done during lunch. Looking at the customers who were reading the missing person notices seriously when they came in, Yabamiya couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Boss is really a kind person. Mamie's. This restaurant has become quite famous recently. I heard that it has already surpassed Dukas Restaurant to become the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. I just don't know if it lives up to its name. After all, Beat's roast pig is quite good. The rankings on the meat rankings have to be based on strength. Outside Mamie's, a gray-haired old man looked up at the signboard, and then followed the crowd into the restaurant. Avis left Chaos City for Rodu at the age of 16, and became an apprentice chef at Reed Restaurant. After that, he worked at Reed Restaurant for 50 years, and became the sous chef. Reed Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in Rodu, and was extremely popular and famous. Roast pig was the signature dish of Reed Restaurant, and was also known as the #1 pig in Rodu. Beat had been an apprentice chef at Reed Restaurant for 10 years, and he was Avis's disciple. After that, Beat left Reed Restaurant and returned to Chaos City, and became the head chef of Dukas Restaurant. With his roast pig dish, Dukas Restaurant became the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. Avis was quite fond of Beat's disciple, who was quite talented. He was also the one who suggested to him to open Reed Restaurant. Rodu was a place with a very strict hierarchy. Avis had spent 50 years as the chef with the best roast pig dish at Reed Restaurant, but he could only become the sous chef. As such, he didn't want to see Beat, who was also from Chaos City, waste his entire life here, only to be unable to ascend to the position where he could make all the decisions. Just some time ago, he ended his career as a chef in Reed with the excuse of being unwell. He also turned down other restaurants' offers of high salaries, and returned to Chaos City to enjoy his old age. His children and grandchildren were all living in Chaos City. But this time, Robert had come to ask him to be the judge of the meat rankings. He had only agreed after Robert's dream of revitalizing Chaos City's food and beverage industry. Although Beat was his disciple, Avis didn't tell him about him being a judge. In order not to affect his subjective judgment, he put Dukas Restaurant's name at the end of the list. The first restaurant he chose for lunch was Mamie's. He was surprised by how popular it was. The long line outside the restaurant was even more exaggerated than Rue de Restaurant. However, the popularity wouldn't affect his judgment because he only needed to judge the meat rankings. For a restaurant to become popular, one delicious dish was enough. For example, Reed Restaurant's roast pig. Actually, there was another reason why Avis agreed to Robert's invitation. It was the boss of Mamie's, Mr. Meg. As the sous chef of Reed Restaurant, he was naturally present at the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire's king. Reed Restaurant's roast pig had won the title of the best dish of the palace banquet 3 times. He was in charge of all the roasting work twice. Hence, he only saw head chef Bellman as his rival for the best dish of the palace banquet this time. However, no one would have thought that the best dish of the palace banquet would be won by an unknown young chef. The king didn't even taste the roast pig that was served later. This incident was also the reason why he chose to leave Reed. It was undoubtedly a very serious setback for him. Furthermore, he was also very curious when such a young and impressive chef appeared in Chaos City. He couldn't help but want to come back and take a look. Avis glanced at the missing person notice on the door when he entered the restaurant. Being able to help a wanderer find his long-lost son gave him a different understanding of that young chef. As he came early, there were still seats available when Avis followed the crowd into the restaurant. He sat down and looked around the restaurant. Compared to Reed Restaurant, which had 4 floors, this Mamie's wasn't considered big. It couldn't even compare to the first floor of Reed Restaurant. However, the restaurant's decor made people feel very comfortable. There were pure wooden tables and chairs. If one looked closely, they could even see that the patterns on all of them were the same. There were pleasant green plants hanging on the balustrades that weren't completely partitioned off. It made people feel warm to be able to see such a scenery in the early winter. The murals on the walls were very grand, and the divisions between the different races were very unique. What surprised Avis even more was that not only was the restaurant not divided into sections, it wasn't even divided into tables. Demons and elves sat at the same table, and orcs and humans sat side by side. Such a scene was rare even in Chaos City. This boss does seem to be quite capable, Avis thought to himself. Then, he picked up the menu on the table and flipped it open. The dishes with pictures jumped into his eyes, and his eyes lit up. At the same time, he was a little surprised. On this menu, even the cheapest snack cost 200 copper coins per serving. The Peking duck cost 2,000 copper coins per serving. Even Reed Restaurant's roast pig was only 5,000 copper coins, but that was enough for 6 people to eat at the same time. Furthermore, Reed Restaurant was a century-old restaurant. How could a restaurant that had been open for less than half a year compare to it? The spicy grilled fish won the best dish of the palace banquet that day, but this dish should be counted as part of the seafood rankings. There was also a braised chicken and rice and a black pepper steak in the palace banquet that day. There was soup in the braised chicken, so I wonder if it would be counted as part of the soup rankings. In that case, let's try the black pepper steak, roast beef kebab, Peking duck. Avis looked at the dish labeled New Product in red and pondered. Why don't we try this red braised pork first? Creating a new product is the best way to test a chef's ability. Yabamiya came to Avis' table and asked with a smile, "What would you like to order?" Avis wasn't in a hurry to answer. Instead, he looked up at Yabamiya and asked, "May I ask what kind of meat is used for this red braised pork?" "This red braised pork is cooked with the pork of the fiery pig," Yabamiya replied with a smile. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 982. Fiery Pig. That's a 5th level magical beast. And it's unique to Red Dragon Island. It hasn't been found anywhere else. Fuck. If I remember correctly, red dragons like to eat fiery pigs the most, right? How did Mr. Mac get it? Weren't the dragons that caused trouble a few days ago and were beaten half to death red dragons? When the customers heard Yabamiya's words, they suddenly lost their composure. Avis also had a look of surprise on his face. He didn't expect the red braised meat, which was priced at 800 copper coins, to use a level 5 magical beast as the main ingredient. Even the roast pig in Reed restaurant was a domesticated level 1 black mountain boar. Level 5 magical beast ingredients were usually purchased and cooked only after a distinguished guest had made a reservation. Pork. Then I'll have a portion of red braised pork and a portion of black pepper steak. Serve them in that order. Avis closed the menu. The review had to be done anonymously this time. It would be too obvious if he ordered too many dishes at once and couldn't finish them. Moreover, he estimated that he wouldn't be able to finish these 2 dishes. Alright, please wait a moment. Yabamiya nodded and walked to the next customer. Avis was also observing the restaurant while waiting for the dishes to be served. Compared to the usual noisy restaurants, Mamie's, which accommodated more than 100 customers and had a mix of different races, was rather quiet. Even the dwarves and orcs, who were known for their loud voices, were speaking softly in the restaurant. It was a strange sight. Dishes were brought out of the kitchen one by one. Avis glanced in the direction of the kitchen. Although the kitchen was partitioned, it wasn't completely partitioned off. Instead, it was partitioned off by a huge crystal wall. The customers could see everything in the kitchen from outside the restaurant. This was something Avis had never seen before. To a chef, culinary skills were his life. Even his apprentices would keep a few tricks up their sleeves, afraid that their real culinary skills would be learned by others. And Meg had opened up the kitchen just like that, which was equivalent to exposing the entire cooking process to the customers. What kind of confidence was this? Did he not care if others learned his skills secretly? Avis was filled with curiosity. He couldn't help but stare at Meg's back. 3 stoves, a grill, a large pot, and 2 ovens. He was like a spinning top as he moved between the various cooking utensils. The fried rice in the pot, the beef kebabs jumping on the charcoal fire, and the grilled fish gradually turning golden in the oven. Everything looked so natural and smooth, and it didn't feel like he was busy at all. This is an expert, Avis couldn't help but exclaim in his heart after watching for a long time. He was a chef, so he understood the importance of focus for a chef. In the back kitchen of Reed restaurant, there were more than 100 chefs and apprentices. They had their own clear division of labor, which was why they were able to provide food for the thousands of guests. But here, Meg alone had to complete the orders of 300 to 400 customers. This was simply inconceivable. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he definitely wouldn't have believed that such a thing could happen. But will the food made this way really taste good? There was a trace of doubt in Avis' heart. Everything had its pros and cons. When one chose speed, one had to give up something. This was an unchanging principle. Here's your red braised pork. Please enjoy. Soon, Yebamia brought a plate of red braised pork and a bowl of rice and placed it in front of Avis. This aroma. Avis, who was a little entranced by Meg, suddenly came back to his senses. He looked at the red braised pork in front of him in disbelief. The rich aroma was actually more impactful than the roast pig he made. The fat and lean meat pieces were bright red in color. There was no grease at all, and it looked very tempting. White pork has always looked unappetizing, especially the fat and skin. It looks greasy and I don't want to try it. But he used spices and seasonings to make the color of the pork attractive. It's similar to the roast pig, but the color of the deeper roast pig is slightly inferior. Color, 5 stars. I wonder what kind of spices he used to cook it. It actually made the pork emit such a tempting aroma, even surpassing the roast pig. Flavor, 5 stars. Color, aroma, and taste are all there. I just don't know how it tastes, Avis thought to himself as he picked up a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks and put it into his mouth. Avis' eyes lit up as he bit down lightly. The skin and fat were definitely the main characters. The smooth and sticky skin had a barely discernible bite, while the fat melted with just a light bite. It was fat but not greasy, and the sweet and soft taste was indescribable. It made Avis raise his eyebrows. The lean meat was the perfect supporting role. It was thin but not dry, and didn't fill his teeth at all. This bite was fat but not greasy, crispy but not crunchy, sweet but not sticky, rich but not salty. It was simply a delicacy. As the piece of red braised pork entered his stomach, Avis felt that his taste buds were still cheering. The long-awaited feeling of satisfaction and anticipation for the next bite made him feel amazed. He used to think that he had reached the pinnacle of pork cooking. Even if there were better chefs than him, they would never be able to beat him in pork cooking. No one could make pork more delicious than the roast pig he made. But now, after tasting this red braised pork, his thoughts were overturned. He had never heard of anyone cooking pork like this. Although it wasn't roasted, this red braised pork was completely beyond his imagination in terms of spices, cooking techniques, and innovation in cooking. He was amazed. Although the pride of 50 years of roast pig made him unwilling to admit his failure, as a real chef, he chose to follow his heart's choice. The flavor and texture are excellent. 5 stars. Avis thought as he looked at the bowl of red braised pork in front of him and then looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. He couldn't help but feel respect for him. He worked alone and cooked for so many guests, but he still managed to create such amazing delicacies. Furthermore, this was a new dish that had just been released. It was a completely innovative way of cooking pork. Such a chef deserved to be awarded the best in the palace banquet. Avis picked up the rice and took a bite. The soft and delicious rice covered the trace of grease in the red braised pork, making it even sweeter and more delicious. A mouthful of red braised pork, a mouthful of rice. It was so delicious that he couldn't stop. 10 minutes later, Avis looked at the 2 empty bowls in front of him and sighed inwardly. The difference between Beat and him is like a huge mountain, a mountain that even I can't cross. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 983. This red braised pork is too delicious. No, I have to control myself. I've already gained 5 kilograms this month. If I continue to gain weight, I'll be 50 kilograms. A young maiden looked at the 3 pieces of red braised pork left in her bowl. Her rice bowl was already empty. After hesitating for a long time, she finally raised her hand. Please give me another bowl of rice. This has completely overturned all my expectations of pork. Even the roast suckling pig from Dukas restaurant didn't give me such a pleasant surprise. It's fat but not greasy. It's sweet and soft to the extreme. It's simply too delicious," exclaimed a middle-aged man as he put down the bowl that he had licked clean. Avis listened to the customer's praises. If it was another restaurant, he might have thought that the boss had hired them, but after tasting that delicious red braised pork, he only felt that their praises were superficial and lacked strength. Red braised pork, delicious. Soon, the black pepper steak was served. Avis, who was still immersed in the red braised pork, fell into the delicious trap of the black pepper steak again. He's indeed the chef who won the best dish at the palace banquet. He deserves it, Avis lamented as he turned to look at the signboard after coming out of Mamie's. He turned to leave. That was all for today. He was already a little full. The customer's high praises for the red braised pork filled Meg with a sense of accomplishment. He felt that the hardship he suffered in the test field for the god of cookery was nothing. Bringing the best delicacies to the customers was indeed a blissful thing. After the lunch service ended, Meg wrote 2 missing person notices by hand, and then went to the Food Association and the City Lord's Castle respectively. Soon, the missing person notices appeared on the City Lord's Castle's bulletin board and the Delicious Cuisine Rankings board that afternoon. The City Lord's Castle's bulletin board was a column that the residents of Chaos City paid a lot of attention to. Aiden Square was the business district with the most traffic in Chaos City, so the eye-catching magic bulletin board in the middle of the square naturally attracted a lot of attention. Suddenly, this missing person notice became the topic of discussion on the streets of Chaos City. People who didn't know Mamie's well were more moved by the fact that the father never gave up even after being separated from his son for 25 years. Apart from feeling touched, they were also spreading the news. A citywide search was carried out quietly in Chaos City under the influence of the 3 missing person notices. The night deepened. A nameless blacksmith in an alley in the north of the city still had a dim oil lamp lit. A hunchbacked old blacksmith took off his dirty apron and wrapped himself in a cotton-padded jacket. He rubbed his hands and shouted, "Hada, pack up quickly. Master will bring you for a drink. Oh. It's so cold, you need a drink to sleep." "All right." A hoarse voice answered from inside. After a series of clanking sounds, a robust young man walked out of the blacksmith's shop. If it weren't for the fact that he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and his right leg being lame, he would have been a rather handsome and sunny young man. Even though there were a few charcoal stains on his face, he still looked as bright as the sun when he grinned at the old blacksmith. "Let's go, master. It's cold today. You have to wear more." The young man called Hada wrapped his clothes around the old blacksmith. He was only wearing a thin autumn coat. The old blacksmith slowly walked forward and calmly said, "I don't feel warm even if I wear more clothes. I probably won't be able to survive this year's winter. When I'm gone, you have to take good care of this shop. I only have this shop in my life. I'll be at ease if I leave it to you, master." Hada followed with a choked voice. Although he was lame, he didn't show it when he walked. His left leg was forward, and his right leg was forward quickly. If one didn't look closely, he didn't look much different from a normal person. "Silly, what's there to be sad about? Humans will always die. Look at the king of the Roth Empire. He might not even live to my age. Am I proud?" the old blacksmith said with a carefree smile. "Master, you were the one who picked me up back then. You gave me food to eat and taught me how to forge. You have to live for a few more years so that I can be filial to you," Hada said with a choked voice. "Back then, you were lucky to be able to escape from that place. On my way home, I happened to see you collapsed in front of my door. It was a world of ice and snow. You were such a young child. I couldn't just watch you freeze to death, so I picked you up and brought you back. I don't have any children. With you around all these years, I have a companion. Didn't you get the doctors to treat me when I fell sick a few times? You don't have to feel that you owe me anything." The old blacksmith waved his hand. Heartfelt shook his head with tears in his eyes. "You were the one who taught me how to be a human and let me live again. Those people broke my legs and chopped off my fingers back then. If you didn't teach me how to live on my own, I might still be kneeling in some corner begging now. So, Master, I will never be able to repay what I owe you in this lifetime." The old blacksmith stopped in his tracks. Without turning back, he said with a smile, "Silly child. When I'm gone, throw away everything in the house that should be thrown away. Tidy up properly and marry Rachel from the tailor's family. Have a few fat sons. She's a good girl and can lead a good life. That's all I have for you." Heartfelt's lips moved, but he still nodded in the end. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's go for a drink." The old blacksmith continued walking forward. At the entrance of the alley, there was an open-air stall that was still lit. Steam was rising from the pot, and the aroma of the mutton soup could be smelled from afar. After Suede Fashion's trench coats were launched, it became popular in Chaos City again. Hundreds of trench coats were sold out in a day, and it started a trench coat trend among the nobles in Chaos City. Meanwhile, Suede also became the clothing store that women talked about the most. Clothing store. What a strange name. In the past, the rich were all particular about custom-made clothes. In their eyes, only the poor would wear those crudely made clothes that didn't even fit. But now, in order to get a piece of Suede fashion, the rich ladies and young mistresses didn't care about the size anymore. They would be satisfied even if they could change it themselves. Suede Fashion's clothing factory had been completely separated from the store. It was built in the east of the city. Due to the high demand, the tailor and his apprentices were already working in 2 shifts. Because the salary was about twice that of custom-made clothes for others, and they didn't have to look at others' faces, nor did they have to make repeated changes. They also didn't have to worry about orders. As long as they did their jobs according to the drawings and requirements, they would be able to get a generous salary. Hence, the tailors were very enthusiastic. Benjamin was originally an old tailor in the north of the city. He naturally didn't earn much by tailoring for the poor. Previously, an old friend recommended him to try his hand at Suede. He was selected because of his solid skills, and that was why he brought his daughter, Rachel, to this factory. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com.o. Chapter 984. The boss of this garment factory was a good person. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also generous. After seeing his skills, she gave him the same salary as the other tailors, 10,000 copper coins a month. Even his daughter, Rachel, could get a salary of 3,000 copper coins a month. This was something he didn't even dare to think about in the past. Moreover, the work wasn't tough. Although there were 2 shifts, there was enough rest time every day. The food arranged by the factory was even better than what they ate during the new year. He had already decided to work here until he couldn't move. He wanted to prepare a decent dowry for Rachel so that she could marry into a good family. The tailor was responsible for the main steps of making clothes, while the female workers were responsible for sewing the corners and removing the thread ends. The atmosphere in the workshop next door was much more relaxed. Have you heard? Today, the boss of a restaurant called Mamie's posted a missing person notice. The City Lord's Castle and the Food Association have forwarded it. A female worker finished her work and had no new thread ends to cut for the time being, so she spoke softly. The female workers who weren't very busy looked at her curiously. Only the delicate female worker sitting in the corner who was sewing the corners was indifferent. Is that true? That's amazing. Who is that boss? A female worker beside her said in disbelief. The other female workers had similar expressions. Of course it's true. I couldn't sleep this afternoon, so I went to Aiden Square and saw it with my own eyes, the female worker said solemnly. Then, she said mysteriously, also, do you know? That restaurant is amazing. The cheapest dish there costs 200 copper coins a serving, and the most expensive one costs more than 2,000 copper coins a serving. If anyone can find this person, they can bring one person to that restaurant to eat all the delicacies for free. Oh my God! 2,000 copper coins a serving of delicacies. Isn't that too expensive? Can anyone really afford it? A female worker exclaimed. Yeah, my monthly salary is only enough to eat one serving. The female workers were all very surprised. Although we can't afford it, I specially went to the entrance of that restaurant to take a look. There were hundreds of customers lining up at the entrance. That female worker was very satisfied with everyone's reaction. Then, she smiled mysteriously. Also, guess who I saw? Who? The female worker's interest was really piqued. I saw our boss, Miss Gloria. She's also in the queue, the female worker said with a smile. Even Miss Gloria has to queue to eat the delicacies. Now, I believe it's 2,000 copper coins a serving. That's right. Miss Gloria is so elegant, beautiful, and rich. I really want to go to that restaurant for a meal too. All the female workers had longing looks on their faces. The price of 2,000 copper coins made them shrink back. Their monthly salary of 2,000 to 3,000 copper coins had to be used to support their families, so they didn't dare to spend it recklessly. Tell me, Cynthia. Who is he looking for? I've really noted this down, Cynthia said proudly. The missing person notice said that it's an old man from Rodu who's looking for his son who went missing 25 years ago. That child's name is Baker Barzil. There's a black mole on the left side of his glabella, and a crescent-shaped scar on the back of his head. Ah. The delicate female worker who had been sitting quietly in the corner embroidering suddenly trembled. The needle pricked her finger, and she let out a soft cry from the pain. Her eyes were wide open as if she had heard something unbelievable. Rachel? Are you okay? Cynthia got up and walked to the pretty female worker's side. When she saw that her finger was still bleeding, she hurriedly reached out to press down on her finger and moved it away from the top of her shirt. She said nervously, Rachel, why are you so careless? It's no big deal to get stabbed, but if you dirty your shirt, your salary will be deducted. Rachel didn't care about her hand. She stood up quickly, grabbed Cynthia's hand, and agitatedly said, Cynthia, you said that the old man came from Rodu? The child went missing 25 years ago, and there's a black mole on his glabella. Yes. Yes. Cynthia nodded in a daze. She looked at the agitated Rachel, and her eyes suddenly lit up. No way. Rachel, you know that person. Rachel didn't answer Cynthia's question and continued to ask, where can I see that missing person notice? You can see it at the entrance of the City Lord's castle. You can also see it on the Food Association's ranking magic screen in the Aiden Square, Cynthia answered. She still asked curiously, you really know such a person? Who is it? I'm going out for a while. Rachel put her clothes aside, and jogged towards the door. Hey, Rachel, it's working hours now. Where are you going? Cynthia shouted loudly. She looked at Rachel who disappeared at the door, and dejectedly said, What? You said you were good sisters, but you ran away without saying a word. I'm just curious. What's so great about a good meal? Rachel. Benjamin, who was in the workshop next door, was stunned when he heard Cynthia's voice. He walked towards the door, and just as he walked out, he saw Rachel's figure disappear at the end of the alley. Where did this girl go in the middle of the night? Benjamin said with a frown. He thought for a while, and still returned to the workshop to continue making clothes. Rachel had been an obedient child since she was young, and had never made him worry. She would definitely be back in a while. The delicate figure ran all the way from the streets in the north of the city to the Aiden Square. She stood under the magic screen, and panted heavily. She looked up at the missing person notice on the huge magic screen. Looking at the picture, the familiar face, and the contours, Rachel's tears flowed out instantly. Hada. Your father is here to look for you. Baser is your surname. You didn't remember wrongly. Rachel choked as she cried. I'm going to tell him this news. He will be very happy. Rachel wiped her tears, and then turned to run towards the north of the city. Her clothes were already drenched in sweat. The cold wind blew, and it was bone-chilling, but Rachel's face was full of smiles. The little cripple who grew up with her, who took a beating for her, who worked hard for her, the man she loved deeply, his father was finally here to look for him. It had been so many years. Although he never said it, she knew that he would still miss home. He missed the home that even he could not remember. Hada. Open the door, Hada. Rachel knocked hard on a somewhat old door. The door opened with a creak, and Hada came out. He looked at the sweating Rachel nervously, and said, What's wrong? Rachel, did something happen? Are you okay? Silly, I'm fine. Rachel shook her head. She looked at Hada with tears in her eyes, and said, Hada, your father is here to look for you. He's really here. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 985. Hada, who was about to drape his jacket over Rachel, froze. He looked at Rachel, who had tears in her eyes, and asked in a hoarse voice, Rachel, what did you say? I said, your father is here to look for you, silly. I saw the missing person notice he put up, and the drawing was of you. He really is here to look for you, Rachel said with a smile as she wiped her tears. Hada shook his head and took a step back. He looked a little lost, and said, How is that possible? It's been so many years. How can he still be looking for me? You must have seen wrongly. It can't be me, how could I have seen wrongly? The missing person notice said that you have a black mole between your left eyebrows and a crescent-shaped scar at the back of your head. You have all of these. Rachel went forward and grabbed Hada's hand. She looked into his eyes, and said, furthermore, he came from Rodu. The child was lost 25 years ago. Didn't you say you remembered that your home was in Rodu? Barzil is your surname. If you didn't remember wrongly, your name is Baker Barzil. He really is your father. He's here to look for you. Hada's pupils constricted, and his body started to tremble uncontrollably. The veins on his forehead also popped out. Hada, are you okay? Rachel looked at Hada and took a step back fearfully. Hada looked a little scary now. He didn't look like the silly person in her memory who only knew how to smile at her. No. He's not my father. My father died long ago. I don't have a father, and I didn't come from Rodu. My name is not Baker Barzil. I'm Hada. I only have master. I don't have a father. Hada grabbed his hair, and roared with a pained and hideous expression. Hada. Rachel looked at Hada and rushed forward. She hugged Hada tightly as tears streamed down her face, and she started to sob. Hearing Rachel's cries, Hada's expression gradually calmed down. He looked at Rachel, who was leaning on his chest with her tears wetting his clothes. It was as if all the energy in his body had been sucked out. He sat on the ground, and choked with sobs. Why? Why did he only come to find me now? Why did he only think of looking for me after 25 years? If he had looked for me earlier, my fingers wouldn't have been chopped off by them, and my legs wouldn't have been broken by them. If he had looked for me earlier, I wouldn't have been a cripple, and I could have openly proposed marriage to your father. Why? Why now? Rachel hugged Hada tightly, who was crying like a child. Tears also flowed down her face. She waited until he had calmed down before she held his face, looked into his eyes, and said, "Silly, no matter what you look like, as long as you propose to my father, I will definitely marry you, regardless of whether he agrees or not." Hada looked at Rachel, tears welling up in his eyes. He hugged Rachel tightly in his arms and sobbed. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm sorry. I just want to be filial to my master now. He was the one who gave me a second life. I should stay by his side. It's all right. If you really don't want to see him, then don't see him. I respect your choice." Rachel shook her head. She could feel his pain and despair. If it were her, she might not know how to face that father of hers at this moment. "Why don't you see him? At our age, if we can't even see our own son for the last time, we won't be able to close our eyes even if we die," the old blacksmith in a cotton-padded jacket said to Hada in a low voice as he appeared at the door. "Master, Hada looked up at the old blacksmith. "Hada, I know you are filial, but he is still your father. Besides, how do you know he hasn't been looking for you for the past 25 years? The Norland continent is so vast. How would a normal person like him know that you were brought to Chaos City by human traffickers?" the old blacksmith interrupted Hada. "Then, why don't you see him and ask him yourself?" Hada looked a little hesitant. "Go and see him tomorrow. Even if you find your father, I'm still your master. If you're still willing to inherit this blacksmith shop, then it's still yours. When I die, you'll have to be responsible for burying me." The old blacksmith waved his hand and glanced at Rachel with a smile. "Act like a man. Don't be so wishy-washy." After saying that, he turned and went in. Hada sat there in a daze. "Hada, are you willing to go and see him?" Rachel asked softly. Hada's eyes brightened up immediately. After hesitating for a while, he nodded. I will go." "All right. Then I will go with you tomorrow." A smile appeared on Rachel's face, and then she sneezed uncontrollably. "You are sweating so much. You will catch a cold when the wind blows. Let me send you home first." Hada quickly put the cotton-padded jacket in his hand over Rachel's body. After that, he stood up with the help of the door frame, and hugged Rachel as they walked towards the small courtyard not far away. Rachel shook her head with a smile, and said, "I am fine. It's just a sneeze. I will be fine after I change my clothes and sleep." "No. I will go back and make you some ginger soup. Drink it before you sleep," Hada said firmly as he shook his head. My father is on the night shift today. He is not at home." "That's great. I can send you back to your house, and then go home to make you some ginger soup." "Blockhead, you are really a blockhead," the old blacksmith said with a sigh as he looked at Hada, who came back with an empty bowl. After a day of fermenting, the missing person notice had attracted quite a lot of attention in Chaos City. Meg did not expect that this kind gesture would inadvertently give Mamie's a citywide advertisement, and make the number of customers lining up outside the restaurant double in the morning. This also caused Meg to have no choice but to make an enlarged version of the menu into a signboard, and put it up at the entrance of the restaurant so that the curious people who came to watch the show would automatically leave. The prices on the menu had a very strong screening effect. Of course, this also indirectly increased the popularity of the missing person notice even more. If two people could have an unlimited meal, they would have to spend at least 10,000 copper coins, right? That was quite a tempting offer. Benjamin finished his night shift, and quickly walked towards his small courtyard as he mumbled to himself, "That last Rachel. Why didn't she come back for the whole night? Could she have gone home because she was not feeling well?" Just as he was about to open the door, it was pushed open from the inside. "Father." Rachel was also stunned when she saw Benjamin standing at the door. Then, she sidestepped Benjamin and jogged out. "I am going out for a while. This lass." Benjamin stomped his foot angrily when he saw Rachel disappear around the corner of the alley. He opened the door and went into the courtyard. Chapter 986. "Hada, it's time for us to set off," Rachel said softly as she peeked at the closed door of her yard. Then, she walked to another yard carefully, and knocked on the door. The door opened very quickly. Hada, who was wearing a gray cotton-padded jacket, scratched his head, and said to Rachel, "Rachel, do you think it's okay for me to dress like this?" Yes. It's okay." Rachel nodded with a smile. Then, she put a straw hat on Hada's head and looked around. She held Hada's hand, and said, "Let's go. We'll set off like this." "But, why do I have to wear this straw hat?" Hada followed her out, and pointed at the straw hat on his head perplexedly. "This hat is very useful," Rachel said with a smile, but she didn't intend to tell Hada about it. Hada didn't ask further. He looked at his hand that was held by Rachel, and his smile became even brighter. However, he soon hesitated, and said, "But, what should I say when I see him later?" "Have you never thought about what you want to say when you see him before?" Rachel asked Hada. "No." Hada shook his head. "There was once when I was hit on the head by those people with a wooden stick. I've forgotten a lot of things when I was young. I even forgot what he looked like. I only remember Barzil." Rachel held Hada's hand tightly, and shook her head. "It's okay. You'll know what to say when you see him." In front of the magic screen in the middle of the Aden Square, Angus stared blankly at the missing person notice on the magic screen. If he hadn't met Meg, he probably wouldn't have known what Beck was like when he grew up. He wouldn't have been able to post such an eye-catching missing person notice at the most crowded place in Chaos City. There were so many people in Chaos City. Perhaps Beck was here, or in some town in the Roth Empire. He didn't know, but he still waited with hope. He could endure 25 years, so he could wait for a few days. But in the past 25 years, he had never felt such warmth and care as he did in the past 2 days. Whether it was Ma Gu, who was willing to help him, or the City Lord Mansion, who provided him with food and shelter, he had never felt such care in the past 25 years. "Let's go to Mamie's and take a look. I wonder if Beck has been found." August walked in the direction of Mamie's with his walking stick. Not long after, a pair of youngsters arrived in front of the magic screen. "Hada, look. Isn't it exactly the same as you?" Rachel said softly as she pointed at the magic screen. Hada, who was looking up, was completely stunned. The picture on the screen was almost exactly the same as him. Looking at the description, his eyes gradually moistened. It had been 25 years. He had long forgotten his father's appearance, but he still remembered his father's appearance when he was young. "Let's go to that restaurant." Rachel held Hada's hand tightly and led him in the direction of Amy's. Along the way, Hada was silent. Meg came back from sending Amy to school, and happened to see Angus at the entrance. He stopped the car, and greeted him with a smile. "Angus, have you had breakfast?" "Yes, I've had breakfast at the aid station." Angus nodded with a smile. He looked at Meg with anticipation and nervousness in his eyes. Mr. Mac, is there any news about Beck? So he's that old man. He's so pitiful. He has been looking for his child for so many years. He must have suffered so much. He traveled across the Roth Empire on his own 2 legs. Perhaps only a father's love can keep him going. Damn human traffickers. They should be arrested and thrown into Bowtie prison for the rest of their lives. The customers in the queue looked at Angus, who was talking to Meg, with pity and anger. Not far away, Hada, who was wearing a hat, trembled slightly as he looked at the hunchbacked old man. Those lost memories flashed past his mind like fragments. That was a tall and well-built middle-aged man. Gradually, he overlapped with the hunchbacked old man with white hair and tattered clothes, looking like a beggar. F.A. there, a hoarse voice came out from Hada's throat. His straw hat was blown away by a gust of wind, and his face was revealed. Angus shuddered, and his eyes widened. He turned around shakily, and was stunned when he saw the young man standing not far away. Meg, who was thinking of how to comfort Angus, also looked up when he heard the voice. He saw the man standing not far away, and his eyes lit up. That man looked almost exactly the same as the system's drawing. The mole in between his left eyebrow was very obvious. It's the man in the drawing. It's him. It's him. It's him. It's exactly the same. Oh my God. Is this a reunion between father and son? The customers in the queue were in an uproar as they looked at this scene in disbelief. My son. Angus seemed to have suddenly come back to his senses, and walked quickly toward Hada shakily. Hada also limped forward, and then hugged Angus tightly. My son. My son. Angus hugged Hada, and repeated the same sentence over and over again as tears streamed down his face. Meanwhile, Hada hugged Angus, who was almost a head shorter than him, and also had tears streaming down his face. The tall and big father in his memory had become so weak and small without him knowing when. It was as if there was no flesh on his body at all. Hugging him in his arms was like a bone that would fall apart at any time. It made his heart ache, and he blamed himself. It turned out that Angus had been looking for him all this time. He had suffered no less than him in the past 25 years, but he had always resented him. The customers gradually quietened down. They looked at Hada's limping right leg and broken left hand, and all of them felt pity for him. The ending seemed to be perfect, but this child who had been kidnapped by the human traffickers must have gone through unimaginable torture and pain. They did not know how he had survived all these years. Now that he had found his father, how was he going to face his future life with his handicap? Your hand. Your leg. Angus also noticed Hada's hands and feet very quickly. He gently touched the scars that had been healed by time, and choked with self-blame. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. If I had looked after you properly, you wouldn't have been kidnapped by them. Your hands and feet. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. No, father. It's not your fault. Hada grabbed Angus' hand that was about to slap his face. He shook his head, and said, it's those human traffickers' fault. They are the hateful ones. Moreover, I can still live a normal life now. You don't have to blame yourself. Angus looked at Hada. Although his cotton-padded clothes were old, they were very clean. Although his right leg was limping, his body was still tall and strong. His arms were more than twice as thick as a normal person's. It could even make people forget about his handicap. Hello, I am a customer of Amy's. I am very sorry about what happened to you. This is a small token of my appreciation. I hope you can live a better life. Constantine walked in front of the two of them, and handed over a Buffett Bank's banknote with both hands. Hada looked at Constantine gratefully, but shook his head, and said, "Thank you for your kindness, but I will take good care of my father. I have hands and feet. I can support him on my own." Chapter 987. Constantine looked at the determined Hada, and hesitated for a while. Then, he took back his check and handed over a name card. He smiled and said, "All right. If you need anything, you can look for me anytime. I can provide you with a suitable job." Hada looked at the name card that Constantine handed over. He hesitated for a while, but still reached out to take it. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Constantine turned around and walked out of the line. He glanced at the restaurant from the corner of his eye, and looked at the beautiful figure through the floor-to-ceiling window. His lips curled up. "Miss Shirley must have seen my generosity and kindness, right? This is a good start. Seriously, all you know is to show off when you have some stinky money. You don't even know if it's the right time." Shirley glanced at Constantine and pouted in disdain. "Yeah." Anna, who was standing beside her, nodded in agreement. Then, she looked at Angus and Hada, and said with a smile, "But it's great that Master was able to find his child. Yeah, Boss is so kind and caring." Yabamiya nodded with tears in her eyes. She could deeply understand Hada's feelings. However, when would her father come to look for her? What did he look like exactly? "Boss, can you draw out my father's appearance too?" Yabamiya looked at Meg, and a thought flashed across her mind. Then, it quickly occupied her heart. She had always been waiting for her father to look for her. Then, why couldn't she look for him? 18 years had passed. Was he still on the way to look for her? "I'll ask Boss again after the opening hours," Yabamiya thought to herself. Meg looked at the reunited father and son with a smile on his face. However, when he saw Hada's broken finger and bent right leg, he felt as though there was a thorn in his heart. Damn human trafficker. Angus and Hada hugged each other tightly for a while. Angus brought Hada to Meg, and said gratefully, "Mr. Meg, thank you. Thank you for reuniting us father and son." "Thank you." Hada also bowed deeply to Meg. If not for Meg's help in creating this missing person notice, the father and son would not have been able to meet again. It wasn't until the moment he saw his father that he finally understood. After so many years, he still hoped to see his family again, but he didn't expect to see them in Chaos City, which was thousands of kilometers away from home. "You're welcome." Meg smiled and helped the two of them up. "It's just a small matter. I'm very happy that you two can meet again. Rachel." Hada turned around and waved at Rachel, who was standing quietly at the side. He looked at Angus shyly and said, "Rachel was the one who told me about the missing person notice. She was also the one who brought me here. She is the woman I like." Angus looked at Rachel. This girl looked to be about 20 years old. She was pretty and generous. A smile appeared on her face. "Hello, Uncle." Rachel walked up to him. Her hands were clutching the corner of her clothes nervously, and her face was flushed. "Oh, okay." Angus nodded with satisfaction in his eyes. Meg received a free meal ticket from Yabamiya, and passed it to Rachel with a smile. "It's a good thing for father and son to reunite. This girl brought Beck to the restaurant, so this free meal ticket for two belongs to you. You can choose to bring one person to Mamie's for a meal at any time during business hours." Wow! This is awesome. Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw the free meal ticket in Meg's hand. In the eyes of foodies, this was a ticket to heaven. Rachel looked at the ticket in Meg's hand. She hesitated for a while, but still reached out to take it. Then, she said, "Can I give this ticket to someone else?" "Give it to someone else?" Meg looked at Rachel, perplexed. The customers also looked at Rachel. Didn't this lady want to have a romantic meal with this gentleman who had just found his father? Yes, I want to give this free meal ticket to Hada and his father. They should be the ones to have a good meal together. Rachel nodded and smiled at Hada. Her gaze was as gentle as water. Miss Smile is so beautiful, Anna said softly. Everyone's gaze on Rachel also became gentle. Such a lady was indeed beautiful. She's a good lady. Meg's eyes lit up. To be able to have such a physical and mental condition despite being handicapped, he didn't have to worry too much about meeting such a good lady. Rachel. Hada looked at Rachel. He was touched, but he didn't know what to say. Angus quickly waved his hand and said, "No, no, no. How can you give this to me? Beck and I can eat anywhere. This is the place where you young people should eat together." Then, he gave Hada a look. But Rachel still wanted to say something. Hada, who received the look, scratched his head and reached out to stop Rachel's hand. He shook his head and said, "Rachel, let's eat together next time." Rachel looked at Hada, who had a gentle gaze, and Angus, who was smiling at the side. She looked at the free meal ticket in her hand and thought for a while. Then, she softly agreed and kept the ticket. There was a round of applause at the entrance of the restaurant. The customers all had kind smiles on their faces. Although they all wanted that free meal ticket, this was undoubtedly the best outcome. Moreover, they received warmth early in the morning, and the winter was no longer cold. Angus looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Meg, thank you very much for your help. You allowed me to see Beck again. He said he wanted to bring me home. We don't dare to disturb your business and everyone's meal, so we'll take our leave first. We'll come again to thank you later." "You're welcome. If there's anything you need help with, you can look for me directly at Mamie's," Meg said with a smile. Seeing the three of them gradually walk away, Meg retracted his gaze and looked at his watch. It had been more than 10 minutes since the opening of the restaurant. He looked at the customers apologetically and said, "I'm sorry to have taken up 10 minutes of everyone's time. The opening of the restaurant this morning will be delayed by 10 minutes. Everyone is welcome. It's okay. For something like this, it's okay even if it's delayed for another 10 minutes, a customer responded, and the others echoed. Rachel. She seems to be an embroidery lady from Suede, right? And her skills are quite good. In the line, Gloria looked at the three people who were walking away, and she was deep in thought. But Mr. Meg is so kind. He's a knowledgeable and cultured person. Gloria looked at Meg, and there seemed to be light in her eyes. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 988. After the morning service, Meg made a trip to the City Lord's Castle and the Catering Association to inform them that he had found the boy, and to express his gratitude. This was the first time that Meg had done something like this, and after finding the boy, he was filled with a special feeling. On his way back to the restaurant, Meg saw a little beggar kneeling on the side of the road. He had 2 broken fingers and 1 leg, and was crawling on the ground. The bicycle slowly came to a stop, and Meg looked at the little boy who appeared to be no more than 6 or 7 years old. He was thin and frail, and it was as if he only had a layer of skin on his body. In such cold weather, he was only wearing a thin shirt, and his pants were torn from all the time he had been crawling on the ground. There were traces of blood on his knees, and there were signs of beatings all over his face and hands. When passers-by passed by him, they couldn't help but take a few extra glances at him. Occasionally, someone would come up to him and toss a few copper coins into his bowl, and the little boy would kowtow to the ground and mutter a few words of thanks. Meg's heart clenched. 25 years had passed, and the same thing was still happening. Rage instantly welled up in Meg's mind. However, he didn't step forward. Instead, he stood silently off to the side. The copper coins in the little beggar's bowl gradually increased, and soon, it was almost half full. A thin and frail man who was squatting nearby walked over. He looked around, and then bent down to pour all the copper coins into his pocket. He gave the little beggar a kick as he got up, and then leaned over to say a few words to him. He then turned to Meg with a vicious look in his eyes, and walked over to him. As he passed by him, he flashed a dagger hidden under his clothes, and coldly said, "Piss off, or I'll kill you." "All right." Meg gripped the handlebars tightly, and then slowly pushed the bicycle away. On this day, Meg rode around Chaos City on his bicycle, and his expression gradually changed from rage to indifference. The same thing was happening in Chaos City. It hadn't changed because of the time, and even the methods used were the same. On the streets and alleys of Chaos City, there were at least 300 children who had been crippled and forced to beg. There were 7 gangs controlling these children. Humans, demons, and orcs were all involved. Under the peaceful surface of Chaos City, there was a darkness that struck fear into Meg's heart. It was late at night. Amy was already asleep. In the study, Meg wrote 7 letters with his left hand and put them into the envelopes. Then, he wrote on each of the envelopes, "Urgent." For the city lord himself. The light in the study went out, and a black shadow quietly landed from the second floor of the restaurant, and then disappeared into the darkness. "Cry. Cry for me again. If you cry again, I'll beat you to death, oh." In the northern part of the city, in the slums, in a courtyard surrounded by high walls, a drunk middle-aged man held a whip in his hand and viciously whipped the little beggar in front of him. That little beggar was only 7 or 8 years old. His tattered clothes were torn by the whip, revealing bloody wounds. His body was twisting in pain, but he covered his mouth tightly to stop himself from crying. That was because he knew that if he dared to make a single sound, he would really die today. In the corner of the courtyard, tens of little beggars huddled together and looked at the man holding the whip in horror. Ively was the scariest demon. There would be little beggars like them dying in his hands every few days. Nobody could escape from his hands. Everyone who tried to escape died. Even if they managed to escape, they would still be caught and tortured to death in front of everyone. If you dare to hide a copper coin again, you will die. Ively spat on that little beggar's face, and then used his whip to point at those little beggars huddled in the corner. He coldly said, "And all of you, remember this. You are my dogs. All the money you beg is mine. If you dare to hide a single cent, I will kill you." The little beggars lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at Ively. Ively was very satisfied with their performance. This made him feel like a king. In the past 20 years, nobody had escaped from his hands. Oh, no, there was one. That was his humiliation. However, he was still young at that time. Since then, no one was able to escape from his hands. Those who tried to escape were all dead. "Boss, a new batch of goods just arrived. There are 2 little girls. Do you want to use them first?" A skinny man came in from outside the courtyard and said with a sinister smile. "Sure. It has been a while since new goods were delivered. Let's go take a look at the goods. After I finish using them tonight, I will give you one." Ively's eyes instantly lit up. He rubbed his hands and walked towards the door. "Okay." That skinny man's eyes lit up and he excitedly walked towards the door. Creak. The somewhat old courtyard door slowly opened inwards. "Didn't I tell you to wait outside?" The skinny man shouted unhappily. They are indeed still outside the door. A figure carrying a sword walked in from the door and said coldly, "Who are you?" Ivy and the skinny man were shocked. They looked at the man in black who walked in. His face was covered by a black cloth and only his eyes could be seen. Behind him, there were a few figures lying in a pool of blood. They were the people who delivered the goods. "Someone come quickly. Someone is here to cause trouble." The skinny man shouted towards the courtyard in a panic. Following a series of chaotic noises, figures carrying weapons rushed out of the house and stood behind Ivy. With all his subordinates here, Ivy became more confident. He looked at the man in black at the door and sneered, "Although I don't know which gang sent you, it doesn't matter. I am not interested in knowing. Master, I know that you are dead." Meg looked at the children lying on the ground and the children huddled in the corner of the courtyard. He said coldly, "Kidnapping and killing children. This is an unforgivable crime. I sentence you to death." "Pretentious. Kill him." Ivy waved his hand and snatched the knife from his subordinate. He slashed towards Meg. Meg raised his hand and stabbed the sword into Ivy's heart. Without the slightest pause, like stepping on an insignificant ant, the long sword had already pierced through another person's throat. Like a nimble snake, it pierced through the throats of the other people in the courtyard, finally stopping in front of the shriveled man's throat. "Don't kill me, don't kill me." The skinny man collapsed. 20 people were killed in the blink of an eye. Even the leader, Ivy, who was a level 3 knight, couldn't last for more than a second. Under the sword of this man in black, they were as weak as ants. Meg looked at the skinny man and said calmly, "I like to meddle in other people's business." "You." The skinny man's eyes widened as he thought of the man he saw in the morning. The sharp long sword pierced his throat and stopped the rest of his words in his heart. "Don't be afraid. Someone will come and save you." Meg looked at the children who were screaming in panic. He sheathed his long sword and jumped out from the back of the courtyard, disappearing into the night. Here. Soon, there were footsteps outside the courtyard. People wearing the city lord's castle and grey temple uniforms rushed into the courtyard. They were all stunned when they saw the courtyard full of corpses and the children huddled in the corner. "These beasts." The leader of the city lord's castle clenched his teeth and said with tears in his eyes, "Save the children. Report to the city lord." Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 989. The city lord's mansion was brightly lit, and the staff members were walking quickly with serious expressions. "My lord, this is the 5th letter." An official walked quickly into the meeting room and presented a letter. The meeting room was filled with people. There were officials from the city lord's mansion and people from the Grey Temple. They all looked very serious and angry. Their gazes landed on the letter. There were already 4 similar letters in front of Michael. Because of these 4 letters, they were woken up from their sleep and rushed to the city lord's mansion immediately. This was a rare 5th-grade incident. Michael tore open the envelope of the 5th letter with a grave expression. A staff member ran in quickly and said loudly, "My lord, the 4th team has sent back news. They found 51 kidnapped children and 23 suspected human traffickers. All of them were killed before the 4th team arrived. Apart from a few who were just sent to the den, the rest of the children present all had different degrees of disabilities. According to the children, the person who saved them was a man in black. There was only one person. There are more than 50 children again." The expressions of everyone in the meeting room changed slightly. They were already unable to suppress their anger. In less than an hour, the city lord's mansion received 4 letters with 4 addresses. By the time the city lord's mansion's people arrived, all of them were dens of human traffickers. There were already more than 100 children in total. These human traffickers were so savage that it made one's hair stand on end. And what they did to the children made people want to burn their bones and scatter their ashes. Who exactly is that man in black? Everyone was also curious about the man in black who caused this incident. He was completely in charge of today's incident. Even the city lord's mansion could only be considered as a side character. How did he know about the human traffickers' dens hidden in the slums and deep alleys by himself? And he could always kill all the human traffickers and leave before the people from the Great Temple arrived. Michael pulled out the 5th letter with a sullen expression. There was also only one address and a sentence on the letter. Human traffickers' den. Take the children away. Michael passed the letter to the secretary beside him, and said in a low voice, "Order the 5th team to set off. All the staff from the city lord's mansion and the Great Temple are over. Inform all the medical staff and magic casters who know healing magic to gather at the city lord's mansion immediately. Bring the children back and do your best to provide them with treatment." Yes. The Secretary General turned around and left quickly. Michael turned to the officials present, and shook his head as he said, "I'm very disappointed. So many children have been treated so cruelly right under your noses, but you've been able to turn a blind eye to it all these years. If it weren't for the letters that were sent to the City Lord's castle today, would you still think that you've made Chaos City peaceful?" The officials fell silent and lowered their eyes. "City Lord, this is the fault of the Great Temple," an official of the Great Temple said as he stood up in shame. "No, this is the fault of the City Lord's castle and the Great Temple." Michael shook his head. He slammed his fist onto the table, and gravely said, "No matter how many more letters will be sent to the City Lord's castle tonight, and how many more children that unknown hero will save, I want all of you to uproot all the human traffickers in Chaos City at all costs. Save all the children, and catch all the human traffickers. I want all the 10th tier magic casters to cooperate and move out. This is the City Lord's token, codename, Operation Daisy." Michael bent over and wrote 2 lines of words on the paper. Then, he took out a City Lord's seal and stamped it. After that, Meg looked at that Great Temple official, and said, "Go back and inform Lord Roland that we need the cooperation of the Great Temple and the City Lord's castle for this operation." "Yes." That official replied, and quickly walked towards the door. "I hope all of you can end all of this before daybreak. Otherwise, the remaining children will be in extreme danger." Michael handed the City Lord's token to that official standing beside him. The City Lord's castle and Great Temple officials present all stood up and walked out of the conference room. This was a war. A war to save the abducted children. The City Lord's secretary returned to the conference room, and walked to Michael's side. He softly said, "City Lord, these letters were sent to the City Lord's castle by passers-by. They don't know what's in the letters. Perhaps there are still passers-by on the way to deliver the letters. If we leave in advance and find these passers-by, we might be able to find out the next destination of that man in black. There's no need for that." Michael raised his hand, and shook his head. This is obviously all part of his plan. Tonight, the City Lord's castle and the Great Temple will not be able to do better than him. Let him do whatever he wants. What we have to do is to bring the children back safely, and do our best to treat them. Also, get rid of all the human traffickers that are not part of his plan." The secretary nodded thoughtfully. Who are you?" The 7th tier demon grabbed the long sword that had pierced through his chest, and knelt in front of the man in black unwillingly. "A father." Meg pulled out his long sword, and cut off the demon's 10 fingers. He looked at the children in the black cages at the side, and gently said, "You are saved." Footsteps could be heard from outside the courtyard. Meg put away his long sword, and leaped out of the small courtyard, and disappeared into the darkness again. He hid on a withered tree not far away, and looked at the small courtyard that was lit up by the torches. He also heard the shouts from the people from the city lord's castle and the Grey Temple. The children were released from the metal cages, and then blindfolded or carried out of the small courtyard. They boarded the horse-drawn carriages that were already prepared, and drove towards the city lord's castle. 7 lairs, 150 human traffickers, and 342 children. Although they might not be wiped out in one go, from today onwards, there shouldn't be any more human traffickers in Chaos City. Meg threw the long sword that he had rented from the system casually. The system kept it automatically, and a strong sense of fatigue hit him. His hands were already sore from chopping 150 logs, let alone killing 150 human traffickers. Among them were 2 7th-tier demons and 1 orc. I hope City Lord Michael won't disappoint me. Meg took another look at that courtyard, and then leaped onto a roof at the side, and headed towards the Aiden Square. Along the way, Meg avoided a few groups of people from the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple. Among them, he sensed the aura of a few 10th-tier magic casters, which surprised and comforted him at the same time. After returning to the restaurant, Meg got the system to recycle the black clothes. He took a shower carefully to wash away the smell of blood on his body, and then changed into his pajamas and lay on the bed. The nausea from killing too many people made it difficult for him to sleep, but he didn't regret it. As a father, when he saw those children who were crippled, he only had one thought in his mind: all human traffickers deserved to die. Meg sat up, and looked at Amy, who was sleeping soundly on the little bed. The little one was hugging Ugly Duckling's neck with a faint smile on her face, as if she was having a sweet dream. Meg's heart gradually calmed down, and a smile appeared on his face. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 990. That night, many people in Chaos City couldn't sleep. Powerful magic casters roamed the slums and alleys in the north of the city, scanning the surroundings with their spiritual power without any regard for consumption. Small courtyards with high walls were broken into, and the human traffickers who were still asleep were taken away. The kidnapped children were rescued and brought back to the City Lord's castle. The City Lord's castle was brightly lit throughout the night. The children's cries were gradually soothed, and the healing magic casters had tears in their eyes. Some of them even ran out to cry before coming back to continue treating the children. At the break of dawn, the tired-looking head secretary quickly walked into the meeting room with a document. He looked at Michael, who also had a sleepless night, and said, "My lord, with the cooperation of the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle, the cross-search work has been completed. Apart from the 151 human traffickers who were killed by the mysterious man in black and the 342 children who were rescued, a total of 52 human traffickers were caught in the subsequent search, and 61 kidnapped children were rescued. All the children have received treatment, and the healing magic casters have tried their best to help the children recover. However, there are still 120 children who will be permanently disabled." Michael received the document with a grave expression. After reading it carefully for a while, he nodded, and said, "The search will be carried out in secret. Continue to look for suspicious people and locations, and ensure that nothing is missed. Sort out the children's information and announce it to the public as soon as possible. Find their parents and send them home. For unclaimed children, the City Lord's castle will set up a special fund to raise these children. Let them receive education, grow up healthily, and have the ability to support themselves. At the same time, improve the emergency response system for missing children. Once there are cases of missing children, the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple must actively respond to the situation and find the children as soon as possible. Also, arrange for me to meet with Roland today. I feel that there is a need to amend Chaos City's laws regarding the sentencing of human traffickers. I need to discuss it with him." "Yes." The head secretary quickly took notes in his notebook. He stopped writing, and said to Michael, "The amendment of the laws requires the city lord's castle and the Great Temple to vote. How do you think the sentencing of human traffickers should be increased? They don't even let off innocent children." "The death penalty is the starting point," Michael said in a low voice. "Yes." The head secretary nodded. "By the way, did Mr. Mack help an old man find a child who had been kidnapped for more than 20 years? Michael suddenly asked. "Yes, you promised to post the missing person notice on the bulletin board. Yesterday morning, Mr. Meg came to the city lord's mansion again to inform the old man that his child had been found. So, we took down the missing person notice and posted a new one." The Secretary General nodded. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Add Amy's to my schedule. I'm going to meet Mr. Mack." The residents of Chaos City discovered to their surprise that the little beggars who used to beg on the streets had all disappeared overnight. This made some people who often gave alms to children a little worried. They didn't know if those poor children had frozen to death, because the nights had been getting colder and colder recently. "Xiaomi, it's time to get up and wash up. Otherwise, you'll be late for class." Meg walked over to the little bed with a gentle smile. Amy shook her head and said with her eyes closed, "Your little baby is still asleep." "Then, what should I do?" "Your little baby said that she has to be kissed, hugged, and lifted up high before she can get up." Amy's lips curled into a sly smile. "All right then." Meg smiled helplessly, and bent over to kiss Amy's forehead gently. "Your little cutie is online." Amy opened her eyes immediately, and then opened her arms to Meg. She pouted and said, "I want to be hugged and lifted up high." "All right." Meg smiled dotingly. Then, he reached out to carry Amy and lifted her up high above his head. Then, he put her down gently, and lifted her up high above his head again. "Fly! Fly!" Amy's bell-like laughter filled the room. Meow, ugly duckling, which was clinging to the end of the bed and unable to climb up, looked thoughtfully. It lay back down on the ground again, closed its eyes, and stretched out its two little paws. After Amy had played enough, Meg put her down, and then found her clothes for today from the wardrobe. Amy sat by the bed, and stretched out her little foot to gently step on Ugly Duckling, whose belly was turned over, and said with disdain, "Ugly Duckling, stop pretending to be dead. Hurry up and get up." Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling closed its eyes and twisted its body, acting coquettishly. "Don't you know what you look like?" Amy withdrew her little foot. Ugly Duckling opened its eyes, and looked at Amy with a hint of resentment. Then, it stood up silently, and rubbed its head against Amy's foot, feeling a little wronged. Amy rubbed Ugly Duckling's head with her foot, and consoled it, "It's all right. It's not your fault that you're ugly. This is your fate. It's very cold outside today, so Amy has to wear a little jacket and a little rabbit hat." Meg came over with a white down jacket and a little hat. He first helped Amy change into her pajamas, and then wrapped the down jacket around her body, and put on the little rabbit hat. The white rabbit hat had two cute little ears lying forward, and the soft down hat could cover the ears as well. There were also two white fluffy balls hanging down from the sides of her hands. Paired with the white down jacket, she looked like a little white rabbit, and was very cute. Meg nodded with satisfaction. He felt that his dressing skills were getting better and better. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy in surprise, as if it couldn't recognize Amy's appearance. "Father, do I look good?" Amy asked expectantly. Very cute." Meg nodded. "Amy wants to see it too." "Amy wants to see it too," Amy said excitedly. "Then Father will carry you." Meg carried Amy to the bathroom. "Wow, the little bunny is so cute." Amy looked at herself in the mirror, and her eyes lit up immediately. Then, she hummed, "Little bunny, white and white, two ears standing up." Meg suddenly thought of something, and said with a smile, "Amy, you can press those two fluffy balls." "These?" Amy grabbed a white fluffy ball, and pressed it. The rabbit ear on the left immediately stood up. "Wow!" Amy blinked, and looked at the rabbit ear that stood up in surprise. Then, she grabbed the other fluffy ball and pressed it, and the other ear also stood up. She released and pressed it, and the two rabbit ears stood up one moment and then drooped the next. Amy opened her eyes wide, and put on all kinds of cute expressions, looking very cute and interesting. "It's so fun, so cute. Father, I like this little bunny so much." Amy hugged Meg's face and kissed it heavily as she said happily. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 991. "Miss Elizabeth, are you feeling better?" Yabamiya asked softly as she walked into the room with a glass of water in her hand. Elizabeth was standing by the bed and looking down. "I'm fine now." Elizabeth turned around and nodded at Yabamiya. She took the glass of water from Yabamiya's hand naturally and took 2 sips before placing it on the windowsill. "That's great." A smile appeared on Yabamiya's face, but it was quickly replaced by worry. She hesitated for a while before asking Elizabeth, "Are you leaving again?" Elizabeth nodded and looked out of the window. She had been living here for a few days, and had almost forgotten the promise she made back then. She would return to Frost Dragon Island one day, defeat all the Frost Dragons, and save that position for her father. Therefore, she had to leave this place. Of course, most importantly, she was worried that Fox would find his way here. "But you've already been seriously injured twice in a row. Where do you plan to go this time?" Yabamiya was very worried. "I'm not sure yet," Elizabeth replied casually, but her eyes were filled with confusion. "Yes, where should she go?" Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth, and hesitated for a long time. Finally, she mustered her courage and said, "If you haven't made up your mind, then you can continue to stay here. Chaos City is a very safe place. If you don't mind, I can even recommend you to Mr. Mack to become an employee of Amy's. That way, you won't be bored. Become a service staff member." Elizabeth frowned. "It's okay if you don't want to. I'm just worried that you'll be bored in your room." Yabamiya quickly waved her hands as she wanted to slap herself. How could a noble giant dragon like Miss Elizabeth be a service staff member like her? Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya, and was silent for a while before saying, "Let me think about it." Yabamiya, who had been prepared for Elizabeth's rejection, was stunned for a moment. Her eyes lit up with joy as she nodded. "Okay, I'll ask the boss this morning." Elizabeth replied noncommittally. She picked up the glass of water and looked out of the window before taking another sip. She didn't know why she answered like that. It was completely out of line with her style and her previous plans. "Then I'll go to work now. I'll bring you some delicious breakfast later." Before Elizabeth could change her mind, Yabamiya had already left happily. Being a waiter in Chaos City. No, I can't just abandon myself like this, but why do I feel like I don't want to reject it? Elizabeth stood by the window and looked at the cup in her hand in confusion. "Let's go, little bunny, let's go downstairs." Meg carried Amy downstairs with a smile on his face. The little one always made him happy like this. Wow, Amy's little bunny hat is so cute. Anna, who had already reached the restaurant, looked at Amy with sparkling eyes as she came downstairs. Little Amy is so adorable. Phyllis was also a little dazed. She felt as if she was looking at her princess. That aura and those eyes reminded her of Princess Irina. Yabamiya and the others also came forward to praise Amy's outfit. Some of them couldn't help but reach out to pinch Amy's bunny ears. Amy's little face lit up with joy as she heard everyone's praises. She reached out to grab the two little pom-poms with a smile, and said, "I can even perform a magic trick for you guys." A magic trick? Anna came forward and looked at Amy curiously. Everyone also looked at Amy curiously, wondering what kind of magic trick she could perform. "Okay, watch carefully." Amy nodded. She stretched out one index finger on each hand that was holding the pom-poms, then pointed at the left bunny ear and said, "Left ear." The left bunny ear that was hanging down immediately stood up. "Right ear." The right bunny ear also stood up. Left, right, left, all together, as Amy chanted, the two bunny ears stood up one after the other. Coupled with Amy's wacky expression, everyone laughed. They were all mesmerized by Amy's cute performance. "Wow, that's awesome, so cute." Anna clapped her little hands and looked at Amy's little bunny hat enviously. Looks like little Anna also likes this little bunny hat. Shirley looked at Anna thoughtfully. "Let's have breakfast first." Meg walked out of the kitchen with everyone's breakfast. During this time, Meg had basically figured out everyone's eating habits. After breakfast, Meg put on his gloves and pushed his bicycle out to send Amy to class. The moment Amy stepped out of the door wearing the little bunny hat, the customers' eyes all lit up. For the regulars of Mamie's, there were two reasons they had to come to Mamie's. One was the delicious food, and the other was the adorable little boss. Some things would make people feel very beautiful just by looking at them quietly. Little Boss obviously belonged to this category. "Little Boss, the bunny you're wearing today is so cute," Harrison said with a smile. "Uncle Gray Fatty, your little tummy today." Amy glanced at Harrison's big tummy and shrugged apologetically. "Sorry, I really can't bring myself to praise it." Harrison was speechless. Although he was so angry, why couldn't he vent his anger? The customers all laughed. Listening to Little Boss scold the customers was also a very important source of entertainment. "Uncle Third Hair, do your best. Work a little harder, and you can become Uncle Two Hair." Amy climbed onto her bicycle and said seriously to a grinning uncle with a bald head. Her bunny ears even stood up a few times as if she was encouraging him. The uncle silently twirled the remaining 3 strands of hair on his forehead around his head twice, trying to make the desert oasis look more luxuriant. Meg shook his head with a smile and reminded Amy to sit tight. He stepped lightly on the pedals, and the bicycle moved forward. "Wow! What a cute bunny spirit." "That's not a bunny spirit. She's obviously the super famous little hero recently." "Amy. They're both hats, but why is hers so beautiful?" After sending Amy to school, the students looked at Amy, who was wearing a hat, and it attracted a lot of attention. Meg used a stern look to scare away a few children who were obviously looking at her with some inexplicable feelings. Although they were only 7 or 8 years old, they had to be strangled in the cradle. Chapter 992. On the way back, Meg made a point of observing the streets. There were no more beggars on the streets, and there was an obvious increase in the number of patrols from the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle. That was undoubtedly a good thing. The most Mag could do when it came to dealing with abductions was to deter them. However, if he wanted to pull out the entangled web of interests after that, he would still have to rely on the City Lord's castle. In his last letter to City Lord Michael, he put forward some of his ideas. If the City Lord could take some of his suggestions into consideration, it should be able to greatly limit the number of child abductions in Chaos City. After the busy opening hours, everyone in Mamie's finally had some time to rest. Meg walked out of the kitchen and was taking off his apron. Yabamiya walked over and hesitantly said, "Boss, I have something to tell you." "Oh, yes. Mia, the chicken soup and fried rice are already in the thermos. You can just take them away. Is that injured lady feeling better? Meg asked with a gentle smile as he hung the apron at the side. Her injuries are much better now. She's fine. Mia quickly nodded. She hesitated for a moment, and then said, "There's another thing I want to ask you. Is the restaurant still short of waitresses?" Mag was a little surprised as he looked at Mia. A thought flashed through his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. He nodded with a smile, and said, "That's right. The number of customers in the restaurant has increased by a lot, and we're indeed a little short-handed. If we have an exceptional employee like Mia, then the more, the better." Mia's eyes lit up. She nervously said, "Then can I recommend someone? She's better than me in everything. She's also prettier than me. Recommend a new employee." Meg's expression suddenly became a little strange. No way. How could that be? Meg thought of that lady who fought to the end on the frost battlefield. No matter how he thought about it, she didn't seem like a giant dragon who would work as a waitress at Mamie's. Yes. Mia hurriedly nodded and looked at Meg expectantly. Meg thought for a while and nodded. "Since she's recommended by Mia, we can let her come to the restaurant for an interview. If she passes the interview, she'll be very welcome to join Mamie's." Meg had already thought it through. Anyway, there were a lot of people in Mamie's team now. There was the crossdresser, the princess of the Moon Nation, the elven trader, the #1 knight of the Norland continent. Cross this one out. It wouldn't hurt to have another Frost Dragon Chief's daughter. After all, she was an 8th-tier super fighter. "Thank you," Mia said with a surprised smile on her face. "If I can find a suitable employee, I should be the one thanking you," Meg said with a smile. Mia looked at Meg and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he made up his mind and said, "There is one more thing that I would like to trouble you with. I saw the portrait you drew for Uncle Angus, and it looked exactly like his child. I've never seen my father since I was a child. I only heard about his appearance from my mother. Can you draw a portrait of my father for me? I want to go look for him after I save enough money. This was my mother's last wish." Mia's expression was nervous and hopeful. Meg looked at Mia with a pained expression. He nodded with a smile, and gently said, "Of course. I might not be able to draw an identical portrait, but I'll try my best." Thank you. Mia's eyes reddened immediately, and he bowed deeply to Meg. "You're welcome." Meg helped Mia up as he said in his heart, "System, draw me another portrait. I'll pay you 1,000 copper coins. Deal?" Host. The system's previous order was 10,000 copper coins. "You're going overboard by reducing the price by 10 times. The system was dissatisfied. "That was because I gave you an extra 9,000 copper coins to celebrate your opening. Now that the market has returned to normal, 1,000 copper coins is the market price. If I don't buy it from you, wouldn't it be a waste of your skill? Think about it. How many 1,000 copper coins can you earn after working hard for a year? Now, all you have to do is use the photocopier and you'll earn 1,000 copper coins. Don't you know how to calculate such a simple sum?" Meg said in his heart with a smile. "That seems to be the case." The system's voice was shaken. "Now, start the list of questions. I'll ask you what information you need," Meg said naturally. "This requires appearance and characteristics." Meg followed the system's request and quickly finished asking Mia the questions and obtained the necessary information. "Wait here for a moment. I'll go upstairs and draw the portrait for you." Meg stood up and walked upstairs. After reading for a while in the study room, he went downstairs with the portrait sent by the system after about 10 minutes. This is the best portrait I can draw. I'm not sure if it's accurate or not. Meg handed the rolled-up portrait to Mia. When Mia took the portrait, her hands were clearly trembling, and her breathing had also become rapid. In her world, regarding her father, there were only some words that her mother often repeated to her before she went to bed. Although she had been trying hard to construct a complete image of her father in her mind, until now, she still didn't know what her father should look like. The portrait slowly unfolded, and a majestic man wearing gold and silver armor with a golden and silver dragon horn on his head appeared in front of her eyes. His eyebrows were as sharp as swords, his eyes were as cold as blades, and there was a long and narrow scar above his left eyebrow. Even though it was only a portrait, the aura he exuded still made people want to bow down to him. Father. Tears welled up in Yabamiya's eyes as she looked at the man in the portrait. The fragmented fantasies in her mind finally pieced together. So, this was her father. Her mother had waited for him for more than 10 years, but in the end, he still hadn't returned. You'll find him. Meg gently placed his hand on Yabamiya's head and said gently. Feeling the warmth from the top of her head, Mia gradually calmed down. She looked at Meg and said gratefully, "Thank you, boss." After putting away the portrait, Yabamiya carried the thermal box and walked quickly towards the dormitory. Her footsteps were light as if she was about to fly. After opening the dormitory door and placing the thermal box on the dining table, Mia opened the door to her room and looked at Elizabeth, who was standing by the window. She said happily, "Miss Elizabeth, the boss agreed to let you go for the interview. Also, he drew a portrait of my father for me. I finally know how my father looks like. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 993. A Portrait of Your Father. Elizabeth immediately turned around, and looked at the rolled-up piece of paper in Yabamiya's hands with a hint of bewilderment in her eyes. Yes. Didn't I tell you last night that our boss drew a portrait of the son of an old man who had lost his child, and then posted a missing person notice? Then this morning, the child who had been lost for 25 years came to Amy's, and was reunited with his father. My God, he really does look exactly like the portrait that boss drew." Yabamiya nodded. She waved the portrait in her hands excitedly, and continued, "Then I asked boss to draw a portrait of my father for me today. Even though I've never seen him before, and have only heard of his appearance from my mother, I have a feeling that boss drew my father." Elizabeth looked at the excited Yabamiya with a complex expression, and asked, "Do you really want to know what he looks like that much?" "Of course. I really want to know what he looks like. I often dream of him, but I can't remember what he looks like every time I wake up." Yabamiya nodded, and was a little dejected. However, she quickly became elated again, and said, "But now I know what he looks like. Let me show you." Yabamiya untied the string on the portrait as she spoke, and slowly unfurled it. A majestic man wearing a suit of gold and silver armor with a pair of gold and silver dragon horns on his head appeared in the portrait. "Father." Elizabeth fell into a momentary daze at the sight of the man in the portrait. She hadn't seen him for 3 years, and his appearance had already become a little blurry in her memory. Only after seeing this portrait did it become clear again. However, a hint of bewilderment quickly flashed through her eyes. Even she couldn't draw her father's portrait so vividly, but Mia had obtained it from Meg. Could it be that he really drew this portrait based on Mia's description? Of course, what made her even more uneasy was that Mia had already known what her father looked like from the moment this portrait appeared. That pair of gold and silver horns was quite famous across the entire Norland continent. "Miss Elizabeth, isn't my father handsome? Once I've saved up enough money, I'll go and look for him. Perhaps if I meet any dragon customers in the future, I'll take out this portrait and ask them if they know my father. I believe that one day, I'll be able to find him too." Yabamiya revealed a hopeful smile. Are you looking for him? Elizabeth looked at her smile and felt a little inexplicable. If Mia really did this, then her identity would soon be exposed. Their father had more enemies than friends. Mia also felt the change in Elizabeth's mood and asked curiously, Miss Elizabeth, do you know my father? Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya in silence for a long time and nodded. I know her. Really? Yabamiya's eyes immediately lit up, and her voice trembled slightly. She couldn't help but grab onto Elizabeth's hand, and exclaim, You really know my father. Do you know who he is? Where is he now? It had been more than 10 years, and this was the first time she knew what her father looked like. She didn't think that she would be able to find out about him so soon. It even made her feel a little surreal. Because he's also my father. Elizabeth tried her best to control her voice, but it still trembled a little. You. Yabamiya was stunned. She blinked at White Elizabeth, and thought that she had misheard. Miss White Elizabeth, what did you just say? She asked tentatively. He's your father, and also my father, Elizabeth replied. How is that possible? Yabamiya was finally sure that she hadn't misheard. She took a few steps back and looked at Elizabeth in disbelief. How could her father be Miss Elizabeth's father? His name is Rankster, and he's the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. He's a powerful giant dragon. I'm Elizabeth, Rankster's daughter. I'm also a frost dragon. Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya, and tried her best to speak calmly. Yabamiya opened her mouth and looked at Elizabeth for a long time. Her mind was in a mess as Elizabeth's words kept echoing in her head. After a long time, Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth with red eyes and asked, Did you already know? I'm sorry. Due to many reasons, I hid this from you. Elizabeth nodded with an apologetic look on her face. However, she quickly put on a serious face, and said, However, I have to tell you that my father has many enemies. If others know your identity, you will be in extreme danger. Yabamiya's eyes were red, and she said with a sobbing voice, What about him? Where is he? Why hasn't he come back for so many years? Why didn't he come back to see my mother even after he promised her that he would? I don't know. They all said that he's dead. Elizabeth shook her head. She didn't say that he wasn't by her mother's side when she died either. Dead? Yabamiya trembled, and her body swayed. Her eyes lost a lot of light as if she couldn't support her body anymore. Elizabeth held Yabamiya's shoulder and softly said, That's just what they said. No one saw his body. I think he's just trapped somewhere. Yabamiya felt the warmth from Elizabeth's hands on her shoulder, and looked at Elizabeth. She immediately jumped into her arms and cried. Elizabeth's body stiffened. She looked at Mia, who was trembling and crying in her arms, and her heart softened. She raised her hand and placed it gently on her back to comfort her. She didn't know how to comfort Mia. It was as if no one had ever comforted her before. However, she wanted to bring some warmth to Mia. At least she was still here. Then, can I call you big sister? Mia cried in Elizabeth's arms for a long time. Her tears wet her clothes, and she looked up at her with teary eyes and asked softly. Elizabeth was a little taken aback when she heard Yabamiya call her big sister. However, when she saw how pitiful Yabamiya looked, she couldn't bear to reject her. After thinking for a while, she nodded. However, she quickly added, Only when there are no outsiders. Okay. Yabamiya nodded vigorously, and a smile appeared on her face. Ever since her mother passed away, she hadn't felt such a warm and reliable hug. This was the first time she knew that she had a big sister in this world other than her father. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 994. Big Sistery, how did you find me? Yabamiya asked after calming herself down. She turned to Elizabeth with a curious look on her face. I obtained the ring that father left behind. He told me of your existence, and I found you through the information he left behind. Elizabeth opened her palm to reveal the ring that she had entrusted to Mia for safekeeping. Even though father didn't come to find you, he still felt very guilty. This ring contains his gift to you. It's a golden dragon origin. After absorbing this dragon origin, you'll be able to shed the shackles of being a half-dragon and become a true giant dragon. Elizabeth placed the ring in Mia's hand. Become a true giant dragon. Yabamiya looked at the ring in her hand with a hint of hesitation in her eyes. Elizabeth replied, giant dragons soar in the sky, and are the most powerful beings on the Norland continent. After becoming a giant dragon, you'll possess immense power. Then, you'll be able to protect yourself and everything that you want to protect. Protect the people that I want to protect. Yabamiya looked up at Elizabeth, and a determined look appeared in her eyes. She nodded vigorously and said, I want to become a true giant dragon. I want to protect you, and I won't let anyone hurt you. Elizabeth looked at Mia. A half-dragon who only possessed brute strength was saying that she wanted to protect an 8th-tier giant dragon like her. What a laughable declaration. However, her heart was filled with warmth when she heard those words. Even her parents had always told her that she had to become powerful in order to protect herself. They had never told her that they would protect her. You'll be able to consume this golden dragon origin in 10 days. When you become a true giant dragon, I'll begin to teach you how to cultivate and how to fight. What about you? Will you stay? The boss has already agreed to let you go for the interview. If you want, you can come with me to the restaurant for the interview today. Yabamiya looked at her with anticipation in her eyes. Elizabeth hesitated for a long while. She looked at Yabamiya's expectant expression and finally nodded. All right. Great. Yabamiya was pleasantly surprised. She wiped the tears off her face and pulled Elizabeth to sit by the window. I have so many questions to ask you. Speak, where did you go last night? Where did you go tonight? In the stone house, Benjamin looked at Rachel sternly, his voice full of sternness. Rachel lowered her head and did not dare to look at Benjamin. She said softly, I wasn't feeling well yesterday, so I went home early. This morning, Rachel accompanied me to look for my father. Just then, a voice came from the door, and Hada walked in. He glanced at Rachel, and then knelt down in front of Benjamin. He looked at him sincerely, and said, Uncle, please let Rachel marry me. I will treat her well and not let her suffer at all. Hearing Hada's voice, a hint of shock flashed across Rachel's face. However, seeing Hada kneeling in front of her father, the nervousness on her face turned into joy and gratitude. What are you doing? Stand up. Benjamin looked at Hada, who was kneeling in front of him, and said unhappily, You can't even take care of yourself. What right do you have to say that you will treat my Rachel well and not let her suffer? When Rachel marries you, she will have to support you and the old blacksmith. I will never agree to this. Hada's eyes dimmed. He looked at his 2 broken fingers, and did not know what to do for a moment. Rachel also knelt in front of Benjamin. She looked at him with a determined expression and said, Father, I am willing to marry Hada. I am willing to live with him. No matter if it is rich or poor, I am willing to bear it with him. Hada's eyes lit up. He looked at Rachel, and Rachel looked back at him. Their eyes met, and their feelings were strong. You. Stand up. Benjamin looked at Rachel. He was so angry that his beard was trembling. If you don't agree, I won't stand up. Rachel shook her head. I will never agree even if I die. Benjamin waved his sleeves and stood up. He walked into the house angrily, and slammed the door shut. The two of them knelt on the ground for a while in silence. Hadda stood up, and reached out to help Rachel up. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry, it's me, you are very good. It's just that my father is too stubborn." Rachel reached out to cover Hadda's mouth gently, and shook her head. Her eyes were glistening with tears. Hadda's gaze became determined. He held Rachel's hand, and gently said, "I will think of a way to resolve this matter. Don't be too sad, and don't make Uncle angry. He is not young anymore. It will be bad if he falls sick from anger." "Okay." Rachel nodded, and a smile appeared on her face. No matter what others thought, this man always made her feel at ease. "Silly girl, how many hardships have you experienced in this world? If you marry that silly boy Hadda, I don't know how much more hardships you will have to endure in this lifetime. How am I going to meet your dead mother?" Benjamin leaned against the door and sighed deeply. "It's all my fault. I'm such a useless old man. I can't even help Beck marry the girl he likes." Angus sighed in self-reproach, and his eyes were full of sorrow. A black horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of Amy's. Michael alighted from the carriage, and looked at Meg, who was lying leisurely on a deck chair at the door, basking in the sun. He smiled, and said, "Mr. Mac, I hope I didn't disturb your mood by coming uninvited." There was a small coffee table beside the deck chair. There was a small stove on it, and tea was brewing. The water was already boiling, and the aroma of the tea filled the air. Meg opened his eyes when he heard the sound. When he saw Michael walking over, he hurriedly stood up, and said with a smile, "Thank you for coming, City Lord. It was my fault for not welcoming you at the door. May I know what brings you here?" "I have something to trouble Mr. Mac with." Michael turned a chair at the side around and sat down beside the coffee table. He smiled, and said, "Mr. Mac, aren't you going to treat me to a cup of tea? This aroma is much more alluring than my tea leaves." "Thank you." Meg also sat down with a smile. He poured a cup of black tea into a purple clay cup, and placed it in front of Michael. Michael picked up the teacup and took a sip. His eyes lit up, and he nodded with a smile. "Good tea." After putting down the teacup, Michael looked at Meg, and said, "Mr. Mac, I'm here because of the missing person notice you posted yesterday. I heard that the old man had already found his son through the portrait you drew. Last night, the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple carried out Operation Daisy. With the help of a mysterious hero, 403 children were rescued. Some of the children have been kidnapped for many years, and they look different from before. I want you to draw a portrait of their parents for those children. Is that possible? 500 copper coins for one." Meg looked at Michael with clear eyes. "Host! How can you bargain like that?" The system's indignant voice sounded. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 995. Michael looked into Meg's clear eyes, and pondered for a while before saying, "The City Lord's castle's finances have been tight recently, and I can only fork out 250 copper coins for one painting at most. Mr. Mac, can you make an exception?" Then it's settled. Meg nodded. "Hey! Host, I haven't agreed yet. 250 copper coins. Isn't it 500 copper coins? Why is it less than half again? It's not your money, and you don't feel the pinch at all." The system's roar sounded in Meg's mind. "System, I'm outsourcing a part-time job for you. Have you ever seen a boss who's so generous as to find part-time jobs for his employees without earning a single cent? Besides, this money is earned in bulk. All you have to do is turn on the printer and print out the pictures, and the money will be in your pocket. It's much easier than farming, Meg said calmly. If that's the case, it does make sense, right? The system murmured. Don't be too touched. I'll introduce you to such good deals in the future, Meg said with a smile. Mr. Mac, I don't know how to thank you for your contribution to Chaos City. Michael was a little touched as he looked at Mag. For a top-notch chef like Mag, a simple plate of Yangzhou fried rice could earn him far more money than a painting, and it clearly took him much less time to do so. Then why don't the city lord get a membership card from me too? Meg smiled as he took out a little book and a gold card. After successfully selling a membership card and gaining a 10th tier night, Meg sent Michael off with a smile, and lay back on the deck chair to bask in the sun comfortably. Originally, Michael had planned to send those children to Mamie's one by one, and let Meg ask them the information he needed before painting them. However, that suggestion was rejected by Meg. Meg got the system to print out a stack of questionnaires, and listed all the questions that needed to be asked. The city lord's castle staff would do the questioning, and collect a strand of hair from the person being questioned. Then, they would send it to Mamie Restaurant, and the system would be able to draw the pictures on its own, saving him a lot of trouble. Of course, another reason was that Meg didn't want to face those children again. He couldn't do more for them, but he couldn't help but want to do something when he saw them. It had been a few days since the VIP membership was launched, and Meg's little book already had 6 10th tier powerhouses, 24 9th tier powerhouses, 62 8th tier powerhouses, and 127th tier powerhouses. Although it was a promise without any binding, such a large number of powerhouses, it was enough for Mamie's out of the Norland continent. Ding! The host's spending points have reached 336,520,000. The host can upgrade the restaurant from level 4 to level 7 directly. After this upgrade, the restaurant's defense level will reach level 7, and it will be equipped with S-grade anti-air missiles that can attack 7th-tier flying targets. Apart from that, the host will also get a free chance to renovate the restaurant, including opening up the second floor and setting up individual private rooms. The system's voice suddenly sounded. There's such a good thing. Meg was slightly taken aback. The system's sudden benefit really made him feel a little surprised. The upgrade of the restaurant's level was indeed a little out of line with his abilities. However, he had spent 300 million on strength 2 days ago, and had successfully earned a wave of spending points. It was not a waste to upgrade the restaurant's defense level to level 7. System, who did you copy this S-grade anti-air missile from? Patriot or the Red Flag? Meg asked with interest. Nonsense. How can this matter of manufacturing weapons be called copying? I'm using it as a reference. The strongest anti-air missile on the surface has been developed by combining the strengths of many people. It can explode with a terrifying amount of power in an extremely small space, and thus achieve the effect of annihilating the opponent. The system said seriously. S-grade can kill 7th-tier targets. What about SS-grade and SSS-grade? Have you developed them yet? Meg's interest did not diminish as he continued to ask. Buddha said, not to say. The system calmly replied and did not say anything else. Meg raised his eyebrows and did not ask any more questions. As for that one chance to upgrade the restaurant, Meg thought for a while and decided not to use it for the time being. The restaurant had just been renovated once, and frequent renovations would be a little exaggerated and not in line with his style. Moreover, if he were to add more private rooms, he would need more waiters and would have to change some of the service procedures. This was not something he wanted to see. Boss, I've brought Miss Elizabeth here. She wants to be a waitress in our restaurant. Meg's eyes were closed and he was about to fall asleep when Yabamiya's voice sounded in his ears. Meg opened his eyes and stretched out his hand to block the sunlight. Then he saw Elizabeth standing beside Yabamiya. Her complexion had basically returned to normal, but the breath in her body was still a little chaotic. Obviously, it would take some time for her to fully recover. A peculiar look flashed through Mag's eyes as he thought back to the dress that he had ripped apart that day. Even though his intentions were indeed pure, he still couldn't help but feel a little strange when he saw Elizabeth again. He felt as if he had done something shameful. Could it be because I've been too pure recently? Meg raised his eyebrows. He was not a pure little puppy. Actually, he felt uneasy because of cutting a skirt. Back then, he had done something even more pure. It was not as if he had not done it before. Of course, what surprised him even more was that Elizabeth was actually willing to be a waitress at Mamie's. A proud 8th-tier giant dragon. This was indeed a little beyond his expectations. At the same time, he had a whole new level of respect for Yabamiya's ability to trick people. Elizabeth looked at Meg calmly. His eyes gave her an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The first time she had seen him was at the city gate of Chaos City. It was because of Amy that she had taken notice of this insignificant human. She did not expect him to be able to make so many mouth-watering dishes. However, looking at him now, he gave her a different feeling. Although he was still just an ordinary human, he gave her a feeling that she could not ignore. Furthermore, she felt like she had seen this gaze somewhere before. It did not seem like it was in the restaurant. "Hello, Miss Elizabeth." Meg stood up and extended his right hand to Elizabeth with a smile. Elizabeth looked at Meg's hand, and hesitated for a moment. She reached out a finger to touch it, then quickly withdrew it. She nodded slightly, and said, "Hello." Meg looked at his own hand. This was the first time he had experienced such a handshake. However, he did not dwell on this matter. He withdrew his hand, and smiled as he said, "I'm very happy that you are willing to work at Mamie's. But before that, I need to conduct some simple tests on you. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version, .com. Chapter 996. Although Elizabeth was cold and aloof throughout, she still completed Meg's test very cooperatively and outstandingly, maintaining her dignity as an 8th-tier giant dragon. Her outstanding speed and judgment allowed her to take on the responsibility of serving the dishes. Thus, Meg decided to hire her. "Congratulations, Miss Elizabeth. You've been hired." Meg smiled as he looked at Elizabeth. Then, he congratulated himself in his heart. He had recruited another super employee who was super capable but was being paid very little. It really felt good to be a profiteer. Elizabeth only nodded slightly. She didn't look very happy. "That's great." Yabamiya jumped up in joy. She was even happier than Elizabeth. "If you don't have anything to do today, you can have lunch at the restaurant and get to know the others. You can also familiarize yourself with the work and process during lunch hours. I'm sure Mia will teach you well," Meg said to Elizabeth. "All right." Elizabeth nodded. "Don't worry, boss. Leave it to me," Yabamiya said confidently. During lunch, Meg publicly announced that Elizabeth had joined Amy's, and everyone welcomed her. Father cut off big sister Elizabeth's skirt and let her join the restaurant. "I feel like things aren't as simple as they seem. Should I report this to big sister Irina?" Amy murmured to herself as she looked at Elizabeth thoughtfully. Meg's chopsticks trembled as he was putting food into Amy's bowl, and a piece of fish fell onto the table. Was it really that scary? The fish can't be eaten if it falls on the table. It's such a pity to waste it. Amy looked at the piece of fish on the table with a regretful expression. She thought for a moment before grabbing the piece of fish and placing it in front of Ugly Duckling with a smile. "Here, Ugly Duckling. I'll reward you with a piece of fish." Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with a resentful expression. Didn't she say it couldn't be eaten? However, it couldn't help but open its mouth and eat the fish after smelling its alluring aroma. It smelled so good. In the largest hall on Frost Dragon Island, a well-built old man in golden armor looked at Douglas and said loudly, "Douglas, you old fool. You actually let Fox fight her. You're deliberately trying to kill her, aren't you?" Elizabeth is a descendant of the Frost Dragon tribe. She also has the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe. If the Frost Dragon tribe doesn't want her to become the chief and insists on killing her, the Golden Dragon tribe will definitely not stand by and watch. The few elders of the Frost Dragon tribe were enraged. However, the other party was, after all, one of the top 5 powerful existences on Dragon Island. Hence, they did not dare to interrupt. "Cecil, you old thing, this is Frost Dragon Island, not your Golden Dragon Island. You can't be so presumptuous here." Douglas also shouted coldly. Elizabeth was the one who suggested the duel. "As the Great Elder, I naturally wouldn't break the rules left behind by our ancestors. This is the Frost Dragon race's matter. It's not up to you to tell us what to do. I'll say it here today. If anyone dares to lay a hand on Elizabeth again, that person will be the enemy of the Golden Dragon tribe." 1 year later, the Golden Dragon tribe will have a duel for the new chief. Any young giant dragon with the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe is qualified to participate. "Elizabeth is also qualified," Cecil said loudly before turning to leave. "Great Elder, what should we do now? If Elizabeth really becomes the chief of the Golden Dragon tribe, then the strength of the Golden Dragon tribe will increase again. If we do that, I'm afraid our situation will be even worse than it is now," the 7th elder said worriedly. "Humph. I think that Elizabeth has already hooked up with the Golden Dragon tribe. She even hooked up with Alex. Such a rebellious person is no different from Rankster back then. I think we should send people to capture and kill her as a warning to others," the 2nd elder said coldly. Douglas looked up at the 2nd elder, and calmly asked, "If you kill Elizabeth, can you support the Frost Dragon tribe for the next 1,000 years? The 2nd elder's lips moved, but he didn't say anything in the end. His lifespan was reaching its end. He might not even be able to last 200 years, let alone 1,000 years. "Pass down my orders. Forbid anyone from harming Elizabeth. Cancel all tracking," Douglas said. After that, he looked at the 2nd elder and said, "Also, tell Fox that he will have another chance in a year's time. But before that, if he dares to lay a finger on Elizabeth, he will never be able to become the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe in this lifetime. Have you heard? The person that the entire city wanted to find yesterday was found." "Really? Who's so lucky?" "I don't know. I heard it's a young lady." In the suede factory, the female workers started to prepare for work at night, and gathered together to chat. Cynthia looked at Rachel, who was sitting in the corner absent-mindedly, and curiously asked, "Rachel, you ran out in a hurry yesterday. Don't tell me you found that person." All the female workers looked at Rachel curiously. She usually followed the factory's rules very well, and was never late or early to leave. Yesterday, she ran out without even applying for leave, which made the supervisor very unhappy. Her salary was most likely going to be deducted. Everyone was curious about what she was doing last night. "Yes, it's me." Rachel nodded when she saw everyone's gazes. She didn't like to lie. "Wow. It's really you." There was an uproar in the workshop immediately. All the female workers looked at Rachel with shock and envy. That was a ticket that was worth over 10,000, and they could enjoy the same delicacies as Miss Gloria. Their wages that were deducted were nothing compared to that. Cynthia's eyes turned, and she walked to Rachel's side with a face full of smiles. She held her hand and said, "Rachel, when are you going to eat? Anyway, you don't have anyone to go with you. Why don't you bring me along?" We're so close. You won't reject me, right? Rachel shook her head apologetically and said, I'm sorry, Cynthia. I've already agreed to go with someone else. All right. Cynthia let go of Rachel's hand in disappointment. She turned around and returned to her seat with a pout. At the entrance of the factory, Angus looked at the guard carefully and asked, Excuse me, does Master Benjamin work here? Yes. Is there anything you need from him? The guard nodded and looked at Angus from head to toe. He didn't know why this old man who looked like a tramp was looking for Master Benjamin. Angus pleaded, I have something important to talk to him about. Can you bring me to see him? It won't take too much time. This. The guard outside the door looked troubled. The old man looked quite pitiful, but there were rules in the factory that forbade outsiders from entering and leaving. Bring him in. At this moment, a pleasant voice sounded from outside. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 997. Miss Gloria. When the guard heard the voice, he looked back and hurriedly greeted them respectfully. He waved at Angus and said, You're lucky to have met our boss. She agreed to let you in. I'll take you in to see Master Benjamin. Thank you. Angus bowed to Gloria gratefully, and followed the guard inside. Did he come to see Master Benjamin because of Rachel? A hint of curiosity flashed through Gloria's eyes, and she followed him in. She would come to the factory every other day. The Windbreaker's popularity had greatly increased Suede's reputation. It was now the #1 clothing brand in the circle of noblewomen in Chaos City, and brought in a lot of income for Suede. Although it was winter now, and it was not suitable to wear thin windbreakers, many noblewomen still expressed their intention to order them. Even if they could not wear them now, they could still wear them when the weather warmed up next spring. Hence, the factory was still full of orders. Of course, half of the masters were making thick windbreakers. The windbreakers that could withstand the cold wind had already received many pre-orders before they were even released. Gloria followed Angus to the production workshop. She recognized this man as the old man who found his long-lost son at the entrance of Amy's this morning. Benjamin was Rachel's father. She was a little touched by their sweetness this morning. Wait here for a while. The guard asked Benjamin to wait at the entrance of the workshop, and then he walked to Benjamin's side, and said, Master Benjamin, someone is looking for you outside. Someone is looking for me. Benjamin, who was hammering, was slightly taken aback. He turned around to look at Angus, who was standing at the door. The latter waved at him with a smile. Although they did not know each other, Benjamin still got up and walked to the door out of courtesy. You are. Do I know you? Benjamin walked to the door and looked at Angus in confusion. He tried his best to recall who this person was, but he still couldn't figure it out. Mr. Benjamin, you don't know me, but I know you. I'm Beck's father. Angus was all smiles as he looked at Benjamin. Then, he immediately corrected himself. Or rather, had his father. Benjamin's eyes suddenly became alert as he looked at Angus from head to toe. His shabby cotton-padded clothes were full of holes and patches. He wouldn't have the slightest doubt if Angus was a tramp. He frowned and said, Are you the father he just found today? Why are you looking for me? Yes. I've been looking for him for 25 years, and I finally found him in Chaos City. Angus nodded, and shyly pulled back his shoes that had a hole. He looked at Benjamin and sincerely said, I have a presumptuous request for you today. I saw Miss Rachel this morning, and she and Hadda are in love with each other. I would like to beg you to allow them to be together. Hadda is a good boy, and I believe he will take good care of Rachel. Take care of Rachel. Benjamin laughed sarcastically. He pointed at Angus, and raised his voice as he said, If he is healthy and has a normal family, then I will grant them their wish. But he is handicapped, and even making a living for himself is a problem. He also has an old blacksmith who can't move anymore, and now he has a father who can't do anything. How do you think he is going to take care of Rachel? If Rachel marries him, she will have to take care of the three of you all day long, and earn money to support this family. I only have one daughter, and I raised her painstakingly. Everyone who sees her says that she is good. I want her to marry into a good family and live a decent life. No matter how nice you make it sound, I will never agree to this marriage. Angus looked at the determined Benjamin, and his expression darkened. If he had some assets back then, he would definitely be able to come up with a generous dowry. But now, he didn't even have a single copper coin in his pocket. It would be good enough if he didn't add to Beck's burden, let alone a dowry. He was a father, too. How could he not understand Benjamin's thoughts? Who would want their child to suffer? Benjamin's daughter is so beautiful and capable. How can she marry a handicapped person? Isn't that so? Many of us here want to become in-laws with him, but they were all rejected by Rachel. Benjamin's voice wasn't soft, and it quickly attracted the attention of everyone. Even many of the masters stopped what they were doing and gathered at the door to watch the commotion as they discussed softly. Since they love each other, why can't they be together? Gloria stood not far away and thought, puzzled. She saw Hadda in the morning. Although he was handicapped, he didn't look like someone who needed charity. He had more backbone and ambition than many normal people. When the two of them looked at each other, she saw what love looked like. She was a little envious, and wanted to give her blessings. She didn't expect Rachel's father to oppose it so severely. Rachel, quickly go and take a look. Your father is quarreling with someone. A female worker ran in from outside, and said anxiously. What? Rachel was shocked. She got up and rushed to the door. As soon as she went out, she saw Angus standing in front of Benjamin dejectedly. Her father, on the other hand, was like a cockfight that had won, and was full of pride. Father, why are you here? I had a hard time looking for you. Before Rachel could step forward, a limping figure had already walked in from the outside in a hurry. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Angus was fine. Only then did he notice Benjamin, who was standing at the side. Surprised, he quickly greeted respectfully, Uncle. Benjamin looked at Hadda, and said coldly, You came at the right time. Since your father is here today, I'll make things clear in front of you. As long as I'm Rachel's father, I'll never let Rachel marry you unless I'm dead. You can give up on this idea. Also, tell your father not to look for me anymore. From now on, you're not allowed to see Rachel again. Hadda's eyes dimmed. He slowly clenched his fists, then released them weakly. Father, no matter what, I want to marry Hadda. Rachel rushed over and held Hadda's hand tightly. She looked at Benjamin with determination. Benjamin was so angry that his beard trembled. He pointed at Rachel and said, You're trying to anger me to death. What right does he have to give you a decent life? He'll only make you suffer for the rest of your life. Could this be the person that Rachel is planning to have dinner with? He's a cripple. Her taste is too bad, isn't it? Cynthia sized up Hadda and said with a pout. Yeah, I feel that he's not worthy of Rachel at all. What's she thinking? The female workers were also puzzled. I think she's just blinded by that meal. She's so dizzy from being deceived. If she marries a cripple, she'll be laughed at when she goes out in the future. It's not dignified at all, Cynthia said sarcastically. The female workers discussed fervently, and all wanted to watch a good show. Why does a woman need a man to give her dignity? Can't she earn it herself? Just then, a doubtful voice sounded from the side. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website, .com. Chapter 998. Gloria, who had been watching silently from the side, walked forward slowly. She looked at Rachel with a smile, and said, "I've seen Miss Rachel's sewing skills. She's already at the level of a master. I'm here today to sign a new contract with her. Also, I have high hopes for her. I believe she can live a decent life with her own hard work and skills." The surroundings suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked at Gloria with an incredulous look on their faces. The masters in the factory were all old masters with more than 20 years of experience. Even if they were not famous tailors, their skills were impeccable. However, Rachel was only in her early 20s. Previously, she had only done some side jobs. Although her skills were indeed much better than the average female worker, she was not qualified to be a master. How is this possible? Cynthia had a look of disbelief on her face. Becoming a master meant that her monthly salary would be at least 10,000 copper coins, and her work would be much easier. A female worker would only earn 3,000 copper coins a month. They were both female workers, but Cynthia had even started a month earlier. How could Rachel become a master? Rachel also looked at Gloria in shock. She felt that she had misheard something. Benjamin was also a little stunned. He looked at the smiling Gloria. This kind boss in his eyes had just said something that he did not understand. He hesitated and said, "Miss Gloria, you said you want Rachel to be a master." "Yes." Gloria nodded. Benjamin quickly shook his head and said, "No. This is definitely not possible. She's just a little girl. How can she be a master? Her skills are not good. If she makes the wrong clothes, it will ruin Suede's reputation. This is definitely not possible. Moreover, her experience is so shallow. How can she be a master?" All the masters also looked at Gloria. Letting such a little girl be on equal footing with them made them a little uncomfortable. "In Suede, what I value is your ability. I don't look at your experience, nor do I look at your seniority. I'll pay you according to your abilities and the value you can create for Suede. This is a fair trade," Gloria said as she looked at Benjamin and the other masters. Then, her eyes fell on Rachel. With Rachel's ability, it's a waste of her talent to be a female worker. So, it's not wrong for me to promote her as a master because I think she can create more value for Suede. Gloria's gaze landed on the female workers, and she smiled as she said, "Of course, if any of you are equally outstanding, please continue to work hard and show me your abilities. Then, the next master will be you." The female workers were silent for a while before bursting into a burst of warm applause. Their eyes lit up with a different light. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. She looked at Gloria and choked with sobs. "Miss Gloria, I trust my judgment and your ability." Gloria looked at Rachel with a smile, then glanced at Hada who was standing at the side. "I shouldn't interfere with your family matters, but someone told me that as long as a woman is capable, she can live on her own. She doesn't have to listen to anyone's arrangements." "Yes." Rachel nodded hard and held Hada's hand tightly. She looked at Benjamin and said, "Father, I'll live a decent life on my own. I want to marry Hada. I know that we can live a decent life together, not in poverty. Uncle, I'm a blacksmith. I can support father and master with my own hands. I definitely won't be a burden to Rachel." Hada also held Rachel's hand tightly as he looked at Benjamin and promised solemnly. "That's enough, old man. Your daughter will earn more than you in 2 years' time. You can rely on her to live a decent life for your family. Yes, we old men have worked for our whole lives, but we're still the same as the young lady. The young man is not bad either. He'll definitely treat your daughter well." The old tailors also tried to persuade him. They had already changed a lot. Benjamin frowned as he looked at Hannah and Rachel, who were holding hands tightly. After a long silence, he sighed heavily and said, "Since you're so stubborn, I won't care about you anymore. However, you chose this path yourself today. Don't blame me for not stopping you in the future." Then, he turned and walked into the workshop. A surprised smile appeared on Rachel and Hannah's faces at the same time, and then they hugged each other tightly. Smiles appeared on the faces of the onlookers before they dispersed. This ending seemed to be quite good. Angus stood at the side with a gratified smile on his face. Gloria also walked into the workshop with a smile. She didn't disturb the couple who had finally overcome their biggest obstacle. She thought to herself, if Mr. Meg knew about this, would he think that I did a good job? Under the endless ocean south of the Demon Islands, there was a sunken historical site. There was an altar in the center of the historical site. A sorcerer in a black robe was holding a blue crystal ball in his hand, and praying devoutly, "Almighty God, please guide my tribe out of the fog and open up a new era." Below the altar, there were countless sea demons. They had the upper body of a human, but no legs. Instead, they had a tail like a fish. They used seashells and seaweed to cover their breasts and bellies, and all of them were looking at the altar devoutly. Right at this moment, a strong blue light suddenly erupted from the crystal bowl. Then, scenes started to appear above the altar. That was the scene on land. A tall city, a huge square, and a dense crowd appeared. The scene finally stopped at a restaurant and a man standing in front of it. "It's been 1,000 years. The Almighty God has finally answered our prayers again. This is the chance for Lantish to return to the mainland. And this place and this man are the important clues to break the curse of the merfolk," the black-robed man said agitatedly as he looked at the frozen scene. The entire ocean seemed to be boiling with cheers. The black-robed man kept the crystal ball slowly, and said in a deep voice, "Wake Gina up. She will carry the hope of Lantish and head to the mainland to find a way to break the curse." A crystal coffin slowly rose from the depths of the ocean. A beautiful merfolk lay in it. A merfolk stepped forward, and worriedly said, "Great sorcerer, Gina is still unable to survive on land for a long period of time. If we let her head to the mainland now, she might die. Dying for Lantish is the greatest honor." The black-robed man's voice reverberated throughout the ocean. He waved his hand gently, and the lid of the crystal coffin turned into nothingness. The merfolk in the crystal coffin slowly opened her eyes. "Gina, find him and find a way to break the curse," the black-robed man shouted as he pointed at the disappearing image. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure. Oh.